And just as we go live, we lose Red. I, technical difficulties where she is. But anyways, and here she's back. She's back. We missed you already. My goodness. Welcome to the Twisted Pair, everybody. I am Greybeard.
And I'm Ash Red. And oh, do you want to go ahead first?
I,
I'll
well,
let you
I
go
was
first.
I was gonna leave. I was gonna. Sorry, cigar traveler. I was gonna leave the best for last, but we are welcoming. We're welcoming Zach, aka Cigar Traveler, who is the man behind the shop stops, and he's the man behind a lot of these network and these connections. In fact, bringing Crown Heads and our special guest on. So, thank you, Zach, for joining us.
And speaking of our special guest, as he already has said, he is with Crown Heads. We have the one and only Miguel. So welcome, Miguel, to the Twisted Pair. And we're excited to have you on. Crown Head is one of my top brands that I love.
Oh,
And I have four, oh, 5 boxes that are full, and I had a hard time picking my cigar.
I see. I had a hard time picking a cigar too, but only that was because I was looking for some of my Las Calaveras or some of my Four Kicks, which are, I mean, as you know, I mean, Four Kicks. I think last year was one of my top
Hmm.
five cigars. I have gone after the vertical of the Las Calaveras every year, and every year I've gotten it, and every year I've smoked the damn thing. So, you know, so I finally picked mine. I'm not going to show it yet, but so honored and happy to have you here because we at Leaf and Grain have absolutely loved everything that Crown Heads has done. So thank you for joining us.
Oh, thank you guys for having me on. I appreciate it. I love pairing, food with drinks and drinks with cigars. So, natural fit. I appreciate you inviting me on the show. And on behalf of Crown Heads, thank you for the support.
Absolutely. All right, so
Easy to
let's.
support when it's so good.
Oh yes, it sure is. Okay, so let's just start with you, Miguel. What are you pairing tonight?
Tonight, very, very simple. I'm smoking the Le Patissier, which is a Connecticut broadleaf cigar
Hmm.
that we have. It's made for us by a factory called Naxa down in Nicaragua. Nicaraguan American Cigars SA is what Naxa stands for. They make cigars for a few great companies. Steve Saka is one of them, and they do our Le Patissier. We're very proud of this cigar. Beautiful, nice um, Connecticut broadleaf. And then I'm pairing it with some Spanish sangria. And I am here out in the South Florida sun and enjoying this beautiful, bold cigar. And so I needed something very cold to keep my temperature down. And so I went with a nice sangria. Usually, I would be pairing my cigars with rum. Anyone who knows me knows I'm a rum fanatic. But today, I'm doing sangria.
He's exploring the pairings. So, what about you, Red? What are you bringing to the table?
Okay, so for this evening, I am bringing Las Calaveras, and this is the 2021 right here,
Oh,
Mm,
beautiful.
right
beautiful
here.
cigar.
So it is one of my favorite Las Calaveras. Like this one and the purple. Those have been my top uh, two out of them. And I actually have Las Calaveras from when it first came out. It was limited edition, and then I have not smoked all of mine, so I have one from every single year that it has come
Wow.
out. And I'm down to a couple of them where I only have one of that year, and I can't bring myself to smoke it because I want to see it grow. But later on, I want us to talk about this because this y'all come out with this. It has a special meaning behind it, and a lot of people don't know the special meaning behind the Las Calaveras. So I do want to kind of talk about that. So there's that. Now I am the one. I came in to work today, and I actually had rum.
Oh,
Uh,
fantastic.
and
Oh,
it's sitting it's sitting on my bar. So I'm doing Ozarka water today. So
Stay
it,
hydrated.
I'm staying hydrated.
Well, you
So
can't ever go wrong with pairing a cigar with water. I mean,
no,
it's going to be a good pairing each time. All right,
yes.
Mr. Cigar Traveler, what have you bringing to the table, brother?
This is the Crown Head Four Kicks Capa Especial.
Beautiful.
I picked it up at shout out to Ashton Barrel in Sherman, Texas. They carry a wonderful supply of Crown Head cigars. I am. Are we doing pairings yet? Or no?
Yes. What? Yes.
Okay. So, Miguel, I am pairing this wonderful cigar with this wonderful, inexpensive tequila,
Oh,
Luna
nice.
Azul.
Okay.
For anybody that wants a good bargain, there's no backbite to it. There's no chemically taste to it. And they do have an extra smoky flavor, which I will be picking up because I like my tequilas very smoky. It definitely brings out the cinnamon notes in this cigar.
No, is that a blanc? Is that a
It's a
silver?
Blanco. Yeah,
Blanco. Okay,
it's a
cool.
Blanco. Yep, it's a Blanco.
All right. Well, I'm going to have to say that Miguel. I mean, that's both great pairings, Ash and Mr. Traveler. But I'm going to have to say that Miguel and I have won the pairings for really exploring and pushing the limits because he's going with the sangria, and we're both smoking the same cigar. So I am doing the Le Patassier as well. But
I was wrong about the cigar.
I have a Boulevardier.
Please explain.
Okay, are you familiar with the Negroni?
Yes, very much.
So Boulevardier is the same, except for you take away the gin and you bring in a bourbon.
Oh, okay.
So it's a quarter, 1 1/4 ounces of bourbon, 1 ounce of Campari, and 1 ounce of sweet vermouth, and on an ice cube. And so I wanted to go with something a little bit cooler, as you, because I mean it's still 90 degrees here in Texas outside, and that's where I am is outside. And I wanted to go with a bolder drink that had a lot of, it has some of those, fruit forward notes from the Campari and from the sweet vermouth and the herbaceous from the vermouth, but it also has the spiciness from the bourbon. And the bourbon that I went is just your standard Buffalo Trace bourbon. So it's a well-rounded drink that brings out and is going to complement it's going to complement some of the earthy notes that you're gonna typically find in a broadleaf. Bring out some of the spicy notes as well, and some of the floral notes that you get in from the Connecticut broadleaf. So that's why I went with that.
Very nice. I'd never heard of that drink before. I mean, obviously, very familiar with the Negroni. That is really interesting. I grew up in Cincinnati, Ohio. I'm always representing Cincinnati.
All
I was
right.
going to say, I'm
And
sorry.
bourbon is a way of life in Cincinnati. We're so close to Louisville, Kentucky. That's Louisville, not Louisville, Louisville. And so bourbon is definitely a big part of that culture in Cincinnati. And so very familiar with a lot of the great bourbons. And Buffalo Trace is a very well-respected bourbon brand.
It is very well respected, and it's too bad that the secondary market, and that the allocated market has done what it has done to it because it has taken a good bourbon that it's good for sipping, but it's also really good for mixing because it's not a high standard bourbon. It would be considered a bottom shelf bourbon by most cases. A $19-20 bourbon, but because of the market and what allocated in the secondary and just the drive of it has pushed it up and has made it to where it's near
Hmm.
impossible to find.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I think Buffalo Trace, they also make Pappy Van Winkle out of that distillery. So
Hmm.
if
Hmm.
Pappy, being Pappy, is up, kind of elevated all those brands that are coming out of that distillery. And you're right, the secondary market is pretty wild.
Oh, the
Yes.
secondary market is wild, and we find the second. I think good transition because I'm finding some on the secondary market on cigars, and where
Hmm.
you'll find some really sought after cigars, especially like with your Opus X's or some of your Atabes, and some of the Byrons, and other Padrones, the 20, 26th and 90th and so forth. You find some markets that are just driving those prices up
Mhm.
higher and higher and higher, and especially now
Mhm.
with what Habano is doing with the Cohibas and the Trinidads and the Claudias and some of the authentic Cuban cigars.
Yep.
What as a vice president, so you're I mean it's not vice president, you're the national
National
sales
sales.
manager.
Yep.
Mhm.
How does those kind of markets affect your job in representing what we still would consider a boutique brand in Crown Heads? Two different stores.
Yeah, I think with Crown Heads, it's always been about artisanal, right? I think that's kind of our mission statement is being a very artisanal cigar brand. We pair with some incredible cigar manufacturers like Ernesto Perez Carrillo, my father cigars, Don Pepin and his
Hmm.
family. We pair up with a gentleman by the name of Radio Pichardo in Nicaragua. We also Naxa, and so we have some great partners that we pair up with, but we're very much take an artisanal approach to cigar making, right? And that word boutique, for whatever it means today, I don't think it means today what it meant 5 years ago or what it meant
No,
10
it
Right.
years
doesn't.
ago. But I think that boutique is not only a way of artisanal cigar making, but it's also, I think, an attitude um, and a kind of a lifestyle, right? You enjoy small batch, you enjoy the craftsmanship
Mhm.
opposed to the mass production. And I think there's value in both. I do think as a boutique brand, artisanal brand, I think even though we're working with some really great limited tobaccos, some really well aged stuff that maybe cannot be in huge production but fits what we do, and still bring a very affordable cigar. So we have cigars that retail anywhere from eight upwards about $15 MSRP. And I think in the world of tobacco, in the world of premium hand rolled cigars, if you're in that $8 to $15 range, I think that's very much a value place to be when you consider all the work, all the aging, all the amount of things that go into producing a handmade product. Now, overseas, it's interesting. You mentioned Habanos. Habanos has been raising prices across the board and across the world. Obviously, not in the United States, where Habanos cannot be legally sold. And as they have raised their price, that has brought quote unquote new world cigars, cigars from Nicaragua, Honduras, Dominican. It has brought our product more visibility because now in places like Germany, the UK, Norway, all over Europe and Asia, our cigars went from being very similar price to Cubans to now being very much out, below, way below price points of Cuban cigars. And people are now much more open to trying New World cigars in Europe. And they're finding that cigars from Nicaragua, Dominican, they're falling in love with, and they fall in love with the
Mhm.
quality, the craftsmanship, and boutiques are, I think, are leading the way in that sense.
So you mean
Right.
they're waking up to the rest of the world?
They are. They are. United
And
States
they're
is the
not
number
being so
one.
snooty.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
And we see it. I mean, I see it all the time.
Mhm.
I won't mention there's a distributor overseas that for years talked about wanting to import our cigars to a particular area in Europe, and they were always trying to combat me with prices. And now what Cubans have done in that market quadrupled in price over the last 2 years. Now our cigars, they come to me now and say, Miguel, I don't even want to argue about price. You guys are so well priced at where you are now. There's no problem, no issues. So what we're seeing is, I believe, the Cubans are kind of opening a market to a lot of us that maybe price competitive wise we weren't so competitive, but now we are.
And I want to say that because it's been interesting because it's not only Crown Head, but it's been like Karen Burger. It's been, all these different brands out there. And Europe has become more open to it just because of the prices. And now it's kind of, the blue man worker or whatever you want to call it, they can afford those. So that's why they're going to it. That's why they're opening up to it, because it's just the price is just skyrocketed. And it's not fair to the people who enjoy smoking the cigars for a price to make it to where they can't enjoy that hobby, where they're having to spend like a whole paycheck on it to
Yeah,
enjoy it.
it really seems like they're pricing themselves out of a market through what they're doing. It's
Mhm.
like they're trying to become the ultra
Charlemagne's of,
luxury
of
car
cigars.
of
Yeah,
cigars. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
They're the Rolls Royces.
yeah. And
But
really, what's interesting though is where there are plenty of great Cuban cigars that I
mhm,
enjoy, that I smoke, but I don't think it's any secret or controversial to say that they have a real problem with quality, drawl
mhm,
issues, burn issues, right? And when you buy a Rolls Royce, Ash, as you said,
mhm,
you expect that Rolls Royce to perform.
Hmm.
mhm,
When you buy a box of crowned heads, you buy a box of Padrones, when you buy a box of
mhm.
EPC, the consumer here, if it's a 25 count box, they expect 25 good cigars.
Right.
When you buy a box of Cubans, you hope 20 out of the 25 perform well.
Mhm.
So if you're going to price yourself in that luxury range, you have to deliver as well. And that's where
Right.
I think when someone says, man, I'm going to Canada next week. We have a great distributor up in Canada called Brigham. And when someone buys a box of Crown Heads, I mean, the number one compliment I get is, man, I bought a box of Jericho Hill, 24 count box, and all 24
Mhm.
smoked great. That is huge because they're used to buying a box of Cubans at a very extraordinary price, not just because the Cubans are raising their prices, but because Canada has a
Mhm.
very high tax on cigars as
Right.
well.
Mhm.
And they go, man, I buy a box of 25. I'm hoping and praying 20 smoke right. So, as far as
Mhm.
quality consistency goes, if you're going to price yourself up there, you really have to fix that. And I think for a lot of people, that's where Cubans fall a little short is in
Right.
quality and consistency. And I think part of that is that Padron, Crown Heads, EPC, these kind of brands, Roma Craft, we do it out of passion, out of love. It's a business,
Right.
but it's a culture where the Cuban cigar industry is controlled by their government, and it's very much a
Mhm.
business that they need to thrive. They need to produce so much because it supports their
Right.
healthcare system. So you've got
Right.
two different businesses, right?
Oh
Right.
yeah.
And so I think that's where non-Cubans we have a great opportunity to really prove to the world. I always think of wine when French wine and Italian wines really ruled supreme. And then I remember I'm terrible at this. Maybe it was the 80s or 90s,
It
maybe
was the 80s.
Stag's
80s.
Leap. Stag's
Yep.
Leap came in and
Yep.
just destroyed everybody. And
Mhm.
I think we're kind of having a Stag Leap moment in the
Mhm.
world right now. And I will tell
Yeah.
you, I have more distributors around the world who are reaching out to us now asking to do business because they've noticed that quality consistency, that their consumers who travel to the United States on business or whatever it may be said, hey man, I stopped in a shop, smoked a non-Cuban, it was fantastic. Why can't I get that here?
Mhm.
So it's pretty incredible.
So
Right.
let's kind of switch gears just a little bit. Still going down the same line, but we've seen, we've seen in the recent past, within the past year, and even going back in the past, 3 to 5 years, we've seen S2G really making a push on the market and purchasing, different brands. The most recent one with Alec Bradley, and before that, Matt Booth with Room 101. And there's been a lot of questions within the industry that Red and Zach and I have seen on the media side on it, because we're in the industry, we're just on a different side of it. I'd like to get your thoughts on, is that a is that going to help the market? Is that going to harm the market, or is it going to be, just kind of passe, not really impactful on the market? With a big conglomerate purchasing
Mhm.
a lot of smallers.
Well, it's been going on like that forever. I mean, there was a time. I'm a student of this business. I'm a student of the history of premium cigars. There was a time where General Cigar was family owned. It was owned by the Coleman family out of New York. And
Mhm.
even back then, Macanudo ruled supreme. They acquired La Gloria Cubana in the 90s. They also acquired in the 90s Villazon. Villazon owned Punch and a few other great
Mhm.
brands out of Honduras, and they bought Villazon. And so brands have been acquired always in this business. It's always been that way. I worked for CAO. That's how I got my start in the business. I worked for
Mhm.
the Osgener family. I'm smoking now onto a second cigar, the Osgener Aramas and
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
Mexican San Andreas. And I worked for CAO, and we were purchased by STG, Henry Winterman at the
Mhm.
time, and they eventually bought General Cigar and Swedish Match. So it's always been a part of the industry, right? And I do think that the big companies have learned a thing or two. It used to be buy the company, fire everybody. We know what we're doing. We're going to run this. And then you see these brands that are so hot in the boutique segment and they
Mhm.
drop. They drop
Drop.
really
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
far down and they struggle with it. You know, it's like anything. We see it in the car industry as well. Sometimes when a car
Mhm.
industry, when a car company buys a very famous brand and then it just dies or it loses that shine, it's because they don't know what to do with it. Fast
Mhm.
forward to where we are today, and you've seen them buy Room 101, which was a small brand, but
Mhm.
they kept the face.
Yeah.
They bought Alec Bradley, but they kept the kids.
Mhm.
So the big companies have learned that if you buy a company and you fire everybody, you have
It
essentially
doesn't work
gotten
good.
rid of what made that brand special.
Mhm. Right.
Because you're not only smoking the tobacco and the brand, you're also smoking the
Mhm.
family and the people behind it.
Right.
And so I think they've learned a lot. I think that it's always great to see a brand. Alec Bradley, Alan Rubin, who started that brand,
Mm-hmm.
he struggled in the beginning. He fought hard to get into an industry. He was not Cuban. He had no Latin lineage. He
Mhm.
had no history in the cigar business. He went out there. He worked hard. His kids were little kids. Now they're adults and are great cigar makers on their own. Um, and he built a brand in an industry he had no connection to, and he's well loved and received in the industry. So I think as a whole, as an industry, God, that's the American dream, to build a brand
Right.
and that somebody else wants it. And what I think is great is that General Cigar is honoring Alan Rubin, his work, and all the people that have come through
Yeah.
Alec Bradley by keeping the kids and helping that brand continue on with some identity. Will there be changes? Absolutely.
Right.
Cigar manufacturing, some will change. But I think today it's always good when you see a brand getting bought. That means the industry is healthy.
Right.
It means that these companies are very strong and they're doing
Mhm.
something good. And the truth is, a lot of us do business with General Cigar, either by way
Mhm.
of tobacco or their other businesses, such as Cigars International or whatever
Mhm.
it may be. I think it's good for the industry. But at the end of the day, most of the innovation, most of the um, unique things are coming from the smaller, more independent brands.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
You saw a lot of the smaller brands barcoding before the big guys did, before
Mhm.
Fuente, before any of these guys, right? We've
And they need
seen
to go, and they need to go and barcode because it's hard on cigar shops when they don't. I'm just
absolutely.
putting that out there. Having to sit there and make little special stickers for that. It's one of those things like why don't they have a barcode, something
Yeah.
that simple, you
You
know?
know, our I always say to people, cigars have not changed. If you went to a cigar factory, if we could go back in time and you could walk into a cigar factory in
It'll
1900
be
or
the same.
1901, 1902, there's not a lot of difference. The
Right.
difference, I tell everyone, the biggest difference is back then they had a lector, a person that sat at the front and read the newspaper or read novels like
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Count of Monte Cristo or Romeo and Juliet or the newspaper or whatever it is. Now they have music via cell phones and MP3 players and those kind of things. But the factories are very much the same. I
Mm-hmm.
always say, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't embrace new technologies like barcodes and cellophane
Mm-hmm.
and different things like that. I think those are healthy things that can be
Right.
added to our industry, bring it up to date without affecting our core product. And I
Right.
think that's the beauty. I think that a lot of boutique brands bring this unique and innovative things.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, a lot of tobaccos that are grown in such small pounds. There's only so many pounds that are produced of particular tobacco. The big guys can't utilize it. Their production's too big, and then these small guys get in there, use it. It becomes popular, and then the big companies go, okay, we need to invest and create more, grow more of that tobacco. Or it's great for the industry.
It's nice how everybody is kind of feeding off of each other with that in the way that you described it. And I think it was funny when you were talking about that stage in the rolling room. When I was touring J.C. Newman facilities down there in Tampa, and we got up to the rolling room where they roll their limited editions.
American.
Yeah, American. And one of them goes, "What's the stage for? Do you guys have live bands?" And our tour guide brought out, it's like, well, back in the early days, of the turn of the century, there would be someone up here reading the news because everybody needed to be filled in with what's going on in the industry and what's going on in the world, especially during World War I and World War II. So I thought that was really interesting that they brought that out and that you paid note to that.
Yeah, I think that those kind of historic things I think are important also to teach the next generation of cigar smokers our history. I think it's very important to share that. When there are so many great cigar makers that are no longer here with us. And I do think that part of your future is remembering your past. And I think educating the younger generation on how things were and where we've come from, some of the great legends that have come in this industry. I tell everyone, remember, after the Cuban Revolution, 59, the embargo came in 62. A lot of the great cigar makers fled. But come 1980, in the 80s, it was a very tough industry. A lot of cigar makers couldn't pay their bills. They couldn't keep their lights on in their house. The industry was dying. They thought
they were living in their factories. A lot of them had their families in their factories where they were living upstairs in the roller rooms. I mean, and a lot of people don't realize that.
They would tell their kids, go get an education. This industry will not be here for you. The cigar smokers are dying off. And then boom, 92, the cigar boom hits and breathes new life. So those people kept that light burning through some of the toughest economic times for the cigar industry through the 80s, through a revolution in the 60s, resettling with their families in the 60s and 70s. Our industry's been through a lot, and we're still here, and we're fighting the government, we're fighting different legislation, but the truth is that our industry prevails and has been through a hell of a lot. And I think it's important for us to share those stories. And, when people say, wow, why did someone name a cigar Romeo and Juliet? Why did someone name a cigar Monte Cristo? Well, the lectors, after they were done with the news in the newspaper, they would read novels. And cigar makers would say, hey, that sounds like a great name for a cigar. And so those stories, I think, are great to share.
I just heard the story behind the Bolivar and how the Bolivar name came about. And that was actually a news item that we used on the Texas Cigar Roadshow that we recorded this past weekend, which will come out in the next couple of weeks. But it just brings back to what you're saying is the story. And we've talked about the story. Every time we pair a cigar with something, some kind of story, some kind of a memory comes to mind that we delve down into that memory to identify what note it is, and that's how we teach everybody to build the palate. So yeah, the story is vital. The stories at the core of the culture.
100%. And I think every Crown Heads and every Osgood cigar has a great story behind the name and the packaging.
And see that, and that's where we're going to segue to what I was saying. So I want to segue into the Las Calaveras because that is a really beautiful tribute and story. And a lot of people just come out and they're like, oh, they look like the Day of the Dead, like the sugar skulls. And it is for that. So I'm going to let you go ahead and share the story because I don't want to butcher and leave anything out of it. Because I think it's one of those things that when you smoke, when you know the history and the story behind the cigar, you tend to appreciate it more, and you show more respect to it. So, if you wouldn't mind telling us about the Las Calaveras.
Well, my background is Mexican American, and in my family we celebrate Dia de los Muertos, which is celebrated traditionally on November 1st and November 2nd. A lot of people think it's Mexican Halloween. It's not. And John Huber has a great love for art, who's the man, the face behind Crown Heads, and he has a great love for just history. And he was working on a blend with the Garcias after we launched Jericho Hill. And through that, he was working on this limited edition cigar, and he named it Las Calaveras after a particular um, design that has a skull, the original sugar skull,
Hmm.
and so he thought, man, this is a great opportunity to kind of highlight those who have passed away in our lives. So many of us celebrate cigars. We'll smoke a cigar when someone's passed away. We
Hmm.
use it to celebrate. We use it to commemorate. And so that's really where Las Calaveras was born from. And ever since 2014, the first Las Calaveras that came out, very small. There are 4 sets of initials on the sides of the bands, really, really small. And those initials can be people that meant a lot to our families. It could be a lot to our industry. So Old Man Padron, Old Man Oliva, from music, Tom Petty's initials have been on there. Um, and there's so many just, it's really about celebrating the lives and remembering the lives that they led. That's the idea of Las Calaveras. We launch it in the summer, not in November or October. We do that because John is a very good friend with Pete Johnson, and Pete Johnson has his Monster series that he released every year. Releases every year in October, and so we release ours in the summer, and it's really about celebrating the lives of those who have passed away. And when
And
you smoke a Las Calaveras, I think that's part of what you're doing, right? And
mhm,
In the Catholic faith, with the smoke and the incense, the idea of the smoke rising are a symbol for prayers, that your prayers are rising to God. And that's sort of the
Hmm.
idea also when you smoke the cigar. I know when my father passed away, I buried a cigar with him. I worked for CAO and I buried him with a CAO Brasilia Samba. And that's really where Las Calavera was born and continues to
mhm,
this day. And I've had family members, the purple label, Ash,
yeah,
it's red. You mentioned earlier.
mhm,
My uncle's initials are on that band. An uncle that I was very close with, and that uncle not only was a great family member of mine, but when I was younger, before I got in the industry, I'd drive to Chicago from Cincinnati, go to the Big
uh-huh,
Smoke, and I would stay at his house in Chicago to go to the Big Smoke. And so he would see me, it's that time of the year again, Uncle. I'm coming up, staying with you. Going to go to the Big Smoke. So to put his initials on a cigar band, that's the whole idea behind Las Calaveras. And as far as the creation of the blend, every year the blend
mhm,
changes. Every
yes,
year, John sits down with the Garcias and says, "All right, what tobaccos do we have? What can I use? What's unique? What's different?" And hence Las Calaveras. Every year since 2014, it is our quickest, biggest selling product that we do.
right,
And I think that a lot of people have connections to it, understand
mhm.
it, and every day more and more people are exposed to the cigar and to the story.
So
And I like the
let's.
fact. Okay, I like that they it does come out that they tell about the people like on the
Mhm.
website. If you go back, you're able to say, okay, these are the initials, and this is why. And so it even makes it a more beautiful tribute. So
A-
yeah.
and let's pay homage to the Las Calaveras, and let's pay homage to your uncle, and do what we do. Put some smoke up in the air for him right now. To your uncle, my brother.
Thank
Yes.
you, thank you.
So let's what's the story behind one of my favorite? I mean, Red introduced this one to me. She's like we were featuring crown heads on one of our other episodes, and it was like, okay, let's pair crown heads with something, and she goes, you need to do the La Pastilla. I know I'm butchering the name, but anyway, and I was like,
I
I
just
don't
say
think I've.
pastry.
Yes, she goes, and I said, I don't think I've ever smoked that one, and she's like, what? You've never smoked it? And she goes, and I quote, you smoke this, and it's going to become one of your favorites. And she's not wrong. And so we were talking about Brian McGee when Brian McGee was at the NFG festival back in March, and he had some. I was like, dude, I've got to get some of these. And he's like, really? I thought you liked these other ones. I said, I'm on a kick on these now. So tell us a little bit of story about behind these cigars?
Well, it's interesting. It actually goes Le Patissier. The story actually goes back to Lake Carem. We have a cigar called Lake Carem. It's a Connecticut broadleaf Ecuador
Mm-hmm.
binder, Nicaraguan filler made by Ernesto Perez Carrillo. That's a very popular cigar of ours, and it just has continued to always be a very popular. It's a deep, deep, dark Maduro Connecticut broadleaf cigar, and it's very rich. And while we were making that cigar, John was working on the blend. John had called Ernesto Perez Carrillo and said, Ernie, how are the samples tasting coming out of the aging room? How do they taste? And Ernie said it reminded him of a chocolate souffle. And so John did a little research, and the French chef who really created all the mother sauces for French cooking, who created Haute, Hute, Haute cooking, that higher end, higher top, sauce rich French food that is very famous. His name was Marie Le Carême. And so we named the cigar Le Carême in his honor. What happened was, after that cigar became very, very popular, there was a shortage in the entire industry of Connecticut broadleaf. And broadleaf was almost non-existent for 2 years. Everybody had their broadleaf cigars on back order.
Yep.
People came to Mike and John and said, hey, I know your Le Patissier is on back order. There's a broadleaf they're growing in Pennsylvania. There's a broadleaf people are experimentally growing in Nicaragua. You could just replace the wrapper. And Mike and John, to their credit, they said, no, I'm not going to change the blend. I would rather it stay on back order than change the integrity of the cigar. So we didn't have a broadleaf cigar. Our other broadleaf cigars, the Tennessee Waltz and Yellow Rose of Texas, was on back order as well. We couldn't get them.
I remember 2 years, 2.5 years. It felt like a drought.
Yes.
And I was like, Texas, I need my Yellow Rose. I need my Yellow Rose. I remember that.
100%. And so that's where Le Patissier was born. And Le Patissier, John Huber was working with NACSA, Nicaraguan American Cigars SA. Very, very popular cigar factory. And they are known for having a tremendous amount of stock of broadleaf. And he was working on a cigar with them, and they offered him broadleaf. And he said, you know what? I'm going to make the sister blend of Le Carême. Le Carême is made by Ernesto. He headed up that blend. Now this is going to be a broadleaf headed up in Nicaragua by the guys, Raul Diesla, and some of the other guys down there at NACSA. They're going to help me create this blend. So as a compliment, we named it Le Patissier, which means the baker, which is an offshoot of Le Carême, of Marie Le Carême, and what he was a chef, he was a baker, he was all the above. And so we released Le Patissier to fill that void of having broadleaf, and now Le Carême is back on the shelf, and you have two incredible different broadleafs, two completely different profiles, made in two different countries and two different factories. And it also shows a cigar smoker how you can have this one wrapper and then yet two very distinct experiences. To me, Le Patissier is a little bit heavier, and Le Carême is a little bit more finesse.
Right.
And they both work very well on your palate, and they both have a natural sweetness that you get from that broadleaf. And so that's the story of Le Patissier.
And it
so
goes really well. I was going to say, it goes really well if you have, we had white chocolate and we had regular chocolate cinnamon rolls, and we did it with American espresso. So it was phenomenal. So yeah,
it was phenomenal, and that went down in both Red's and mine books as one of our favorite pairings. And I've got to say right now that it has been pairing exceptionally well with the Boulevardier. One of the things I want to bring out, and if we can kind of talk about this a little bit, is you and I were talking before the show about different types of leaves and how Maduro is a process. Maduro is a color, and it's a process. And we hear a lot of people talk about the Connecticut as a leaf, where Connecticut by itself is what we often describe as a color, which is really a Claro or a Colorado, or a Colorado Maduro, all of those natural light brown colors. The broadleaf is a leaf, and the Connecticut broadleaf is the region where the broadleaf is grown.
Mhm.
Now, what kind of differences do you see in that broadleaf from region to region? And in the pot, this one, because I'm going to screw up the name,
The
All right,
pastry.
the,
whatever, it's all good.
the baker. In the
Hey,
baker, is that a broadleaf that has been brought in from the Connecticut, or is it a hybrid of that has been grown there in Nicaragua?
so Lake Carem and the Le Patissier broadleaf are both U.S. grown Connecticut River Valley broadleaf. Both are stalk cut, hung in the curing barn, and they're both processed though in the Ernie does his in the Dominican, and
Mhm.
Noxa does theirs in Nicaragua. So every manufacturer, every cigar buyer, tobacco broker, tobacco distributor, they all have their own ways of fermentation, and they all have their own ways of aging process. And then when it gets to the factory, obviously they decide if they needs more fermentation or more aging and how they go about it. But both are genuine USA Connecticut broadleaf, and that's very important to us because if you grow that broadleaf in Nicaragua, it's a broadleaf seed grown in Nicaragua. It doesn't mean it can't be
Hmm.
good. It's just not the same.
Right,
Cameroon,
exactly.
I think I'll give you an example. I love Cameroon, but Cameroon is very hard to find a genuine African Cameroon wrapper.
Mhm.
And Cameroon wrapper is grown in two countries, grown in Cameroon, and it's also grown in Central African Republic, which is another country right next to Cameroon.
Mhm.
Fuente famously has probably the best inroads to Cameroon leaf in the industry. Well, when you look at Aladino, Aladino has a Cameroon cigar out right now, but
Mhm.
the Cameroon leaf is grown in Honduras. So it is very different, different
It
terroir,
is.
different land, different weather, different,
Mhm.
completely different.
Soil. Mhm.
And I love that cigar as well. And I think
Yes, but
when you grow the leaves in different places, it does give it a very, very different. I always say Vidalia onion. A Vidalia onion does not taste the same if it's not grown in Vidalia, and so it's very much that way. They grow Connecticut broadleaf, but they're growing broadleaf now in Pennsylvania as well,
Mhm.
in the Black Patch region of Pennsylvania. And it's a very good leaf, but it's not Connecticut broadleaf. So
Right.
we've stayed very true to what we use. If we can't get the
Mhm.
tobacco, we hold off. But that tobacco, in essence, I think is very important for tobacco growers to share where they got the tobacco
Yes.
and where the roots are, because it truly does affect the flavor and the taste.
I, another one, and I love that you said that because
Mhm.
we see on the brands, and as the blends that it's Connecticut broadleaf or a broadleaf, and when I see it's a broadleaf, I want to know where is it? Is that a Nicaraguan broadleaf? Is that
Right.
an Ecuadorian broadleaf, which Ecuador is doing some broadleafs
Mhm.
now? Is that a Canadian, or is that, a Connecticut, or is it a
Pennsylvania.
Pennsylvania? Because you're right, the flavors are so different in each of those. And
Mhm.
another one that we see that was like, okay, well, this is a Habano. And my very first question, okay, is that a Jalapa Habano? Is that a Honduras
Mhm.
Habano? Is that a
Ecuador.
Ecuadorian Habano? Is that a Dominican Habano? Because I've had some
Right. It's
Dominican
Dominican.
Habanos.
Yep. Yep.
Because I'm going to get a different profile
Mhm.
based on each of those.
Yep.
Right.
The Ecuadorian Habano is going to bring me tropical fruit. Why? Because tropical fruit, bananas, is their number one export. The soil is
Mhm.
so rich with the potassium from it that it carries over.
Yep.
And in pairing, and it's what we were talking about earlier, when we talk about pairings, we break it down to that level because that's how you really know what flavor profiles that you're going to get
Mhm.
and what is going to go good with it because of those flavor profiles.
Right.
And I got to tell you, so what's interesting is I've spent time in Ecuador, right? Everyone goes to Nicaragua, Dominican, but
Mhm.
I've had the pleasure of going to Ecuador, which not a lot of people go, because to get to the
Mhm.
tobacco fields in Ecuador, they are way out there. It is a track. But where you see the tobacco, you see bananas, you see cocoa growing, and they're sharing
Mhm.
the same land. And it's
Mhm.
just natural for them to share so many of the same nutrients to affect
Right.
each other. In
Mm-hmm.
tobacco fields, a lot of tobacco fields that are grown in very windy areas in Nicaragua, Honduras, or even Ecuador, they'll grow sugarcane sometimes around the tobacco field to break the wind from damaging the leaves. Well, that sugarcane has an effect on that tobacco.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of these same countries that grow around the mountains. Well, if you
Hmm.
go up those mountains, there are coffee growers,
Right.
and
Uh-huh.
that
And it's where you
soil is
get your
running
coffee.
downhill.
Hmm.
And there's a reason why coffee pairs so well with tobacco. That's
Hmm.
where I think rum, because the sugar cane is being
Hmm.
grown in the same places that cigar tobacco is. So
Right.
there's so many connections that
Right.
I think the average consumer may not think about, but I think is
Right.
part of the fun of cigars and understanding the culture and understanding the growing and really the agricultural part of our industry is where this tobacco is grown and what else is being grown around them. It's really amazing.
And it is. And I want to give kudos because like I know that for those 2 years, people were just hitting y'all for like, hey, when are you going to do this? And I mean, it was constant because I saw it like on y'all social media. It
Yeah,
was
Oh
like,
yeah.
hey, when is this? And y'all didn't waver,
didn't waver.
and and I was even one of those people who are like, well, I don't care, just put it out, but it's not going to taste the same. It's not going to, and that was when I was like, didn't have the knowledge that I have now, and it does impact it. It does. And so that's like one of the things that I'm glad that we're talking about. So Albert says, why did you go with the Vitola for the
Pastelito.
Apasturas?
So Lake Carem is a line that we were just talking about as a Connecticut
Yeah.
broadleaf, and we did a size called pastelito, and Cubans pastelito is a little dessert or a little after
Hmm.
dinner or little
Right.
morning snack or whatever. And so Lake Carem, the core sizes are box press. Trunk press
Hmm.
is the proper terminology, but box press. And not everybody's a fan of squared cigars.
Mm.
No.
And so we did a Bellicoso Fino that we do almost every year, which is left round in a figurado, Bellicoso.
Hmm.
And so we wanted to do something in a smaller format, which we traditionally release a smaller format limited edition in the first half of the year every year. We've done it with Jericho Hill, we've done it with Juarez,
Hmm.
and traditionally those lines have been called shots. It's like a big bullet.
Yeah.
But this year we chose Lake Carem and we named it Pastelito. We did a little pigtail. And the
Hmm.
idea was you want a cigar that tastes like a cigar. You don't want to smoke a cigarillo. You don't want to smoke
Right.
a cigar that isn't true to what a premium hand rolled larger cigar experience is, right? And so we created the pastelito as, hey, I want to smoke a big cigar, but I don't have the time, or it's a little
Hmm.
chilly outside, but I still want the same experience. So that's where the pastelito size came from. It really came from creating a size for the winter like months, cooler months, and doing something in Lake Carem that we wouldn't traditionally do, and that's a round cigar. And so after sampling different vitolas, doing different sizes, different things, the pastelito was a size that we smoked, and we said, man, we really love this. We want to release this. So that's where that size came from.
Okay. And now I want to go on to some of the other ones because, like, when I think of tried and true, it's always Juarez. I think of that one because that one's always been there. It's always up on the shelf. You always see it. It's a good value. It's a good bang for the buck, so
Yep.
to speak. It's like at that great price line. So if you could talk about Juarez and Jericho Hill and those.
So to tell the story of Juarez, you really have to tell the story of Jericho Hill because Jericho Hill was a line that we put out. It was the first regular production cigar that we did with Don Pepin Garcia at the My Father Cigar Factory. And we literally, John Huber said this in many interviews. We're a huge fan of Padron. We're a huge fan of the Anniversarios. And
Hmm.
we were like, could
Mm-hmm.
we make a cigar that sort of kind of was in that spirit, maybe a little bit more affordable for the everyday cigar smoker? So we created the Jericho Hill. And that cigar is named after a fictitious town in a song that Johnny Cash sings. The song is called Cocaine Blues. And if you listen
Hmm.
to the
Oh
song
yeah.
Cocaine Blues, in that song, he mentions a town called Jericho Hill.
Hmm.
And the Vitolas are named after parts of that song. So there's a 44S referencing the gun. Jack Brown, Willie Lee, one's his real name, one's an alias. LBV, Long Black Veil, is a song on that album that song can be found on. And so in the song, the protagonist gets ran down by the police finally in Juarez, Mexico. And so we're working on a cigar for Germany at the time, an exclusive for Germany. And we created this blend and we sent it to our German distributor. He felt like it was a little fuller, a little stronger than what he was looking for, but we really fell in love with this particular cigar. And at the time, there was a catalog company called Thompson Cigar. And Thompson asked us for an exclusive cigar. And we said, well, let's use the cigar. And so Juarez was born from that. And we did a 52, 54, and a 56 ring gauge, which for us is gigantic. That's a big ring gauge for us.
Right.
And so Juarez came out through Thompson. A few months later, they were sold to STG and was absorbed in Cigars International. So at that time, we took the brand and turned it into a national brand and sold it all over the country. It is our most bang for your buck affordable cigar that we do. It's round. We're Jericho Hills box press. Jericho Hills made by Don Pepin Garcia at the My Father's Cigar Factory. Juarez is made for us by Radio Pichardo down in Nicaragua. And the cigar really took off. I think people really appreciate the boldness and the strength without being overtly strong or bitey. And it's just a really nice, bold cigar. And the imagery is the bull on the band, which represents Mexico. The crown on the bull represents Crown Heads. The mountains in the back represent San Andreas, Mexico, which the wrapper is San Andreas. And the check marks on the bull represent the time in the old, Southwest when you'd be thrown into pokey and you had and you'd mark the years that you were doing in the pokey. And so that's really where Juarez was born from, and it has now turned into one of our staple brands.
Awesome.
And this is really cool because it's like I've noticed some things, and it's like, and I've read things, and I'm like, oh my gosh, y'all put so much thought, even just behind the little band, and it is amazing how much thought goes into it, like with the songs and everything. And I'm just, to me, it makes it even more intriguing.
And what I like about it is it's not the Johnny Cash cigar, right? It's not the Johnny Cash cigar. There's a story. And if you don't know the story, you'd still, Juarez, okay. It's a town in Mexico. The rapper's Mexican San Andreas. It's got a cool looking bull. But John Huber creates almost a Da Vinci Code on all of our bands and our imagery. It's as deep as you want to go, he can go. And so when I do events, or any of my sales guys do events, we're able to tell these stories and share these stories. And to say that John doesn't create a brand or blend, and we don't take it to a group of people and say, all right, give us your feedback. What do you think about the color? What do you think about the name? There's not that goes into it. It's literally John creates this. It means something to him. When he was working on Jericho Hill, he was listening to a lot of Johnny Cash. In fact, if you walk into the Crown Heads headquarters, the first thing you're going to see is a huge picture of Johnny Cash.
Love that.
Love Johnny Cash.
Love Johnny Cash.
Absolutely. He's a big inspiration for us. And so it's as deep as you want to go or not, right? But there's meaning behind it. So we don't use, a controlled study. It's not like we're making a new ketchup and we hire people to tell us, what do you think the flavor? What do you think we can do better? It's really about something that's meaningful to us. And we'll share that story if you're interested. If you're not, you'll identify with the brand. You'll like the brand. There's much more to it. And that's what I love, too, is that we don't just do things because they're popular. If we did, we'd have 660s and 770s, and we'd have a fluorescent band or something. We do things that make sense to us, and that's what I love.
So I want to switch over to one of my favorite labels that you guys have, and that is the Four Kicks. Now, before we get into it, and I want to hear the story behind it, I got a little story to tell about the Four Kicks. Right. So, an old roommate of mine and good friend, she's been in wines industry, a good part of her life, as a wine buyer, as a, different parts of the wine industry. And probably has level 4 wine sommelier knowledge, even though she's never, gone down to take the tests and classes and such. And so she worked at this wine shop here in the Dallas Fort Worth area, and she was running their wine society classes and group membership. And she comes home one day, and she's got 4 bottles of wine, and she tells me to leave the room, leave the dining room area. And so what I do, she pulls out the 4 bottles and she puts up this blinder so that I can't see the wines. And she starts making one of her great best dishes, which was a pulled pork Cubans dish. With just the authentic pulled pork Cuban, and her stepmother is from Cuba, so she learned all of that from her. And she goes, "Here's the challenge. You're gonna pick which wine is going to be from the wines for the wine society, and this is going to be our gold level membership." And so I know that the gold level membership, was a $50 plus wine. So that told me right off the bat, all 4 of these wines. So she said, the only thing I'm going to tell you about these wines is that they're all from the same region. And I want you to pick the region, and I want you to pick the wine. 2 of these are 100% of that grape, and the other 2 are blends. And so through it, I was able to pick the region, and I was able to pick, which ones were the pure 100% of the grape, and which ones were the blends and such. She goes, "Oh, and on top of this, I want you to find a cigar and pair a cigar with the one that you pick, and write an article up that I'm going to publish." So this ended up being my first cigar pairing article that I published. And I published the 4 Kicks limited edition 2021. And the wine was from the Northern Rhone Valley, and it was a Syrah. And I can't even pronounce the name of it. It was, it was one of those French, big long 45 letter, names of the chateau, the area. And so I we had the dinner. I picked which wine I thought would go with the dinner, and she goes, "Yes, this is great. This is perfect. Love the pairing. Now find your cigar and bring that into the whole picture." And so I wrote this entire article up, and she published it in the newsletter that went out to like 2,000 plus people. And I was like, "Okay, cool." And the feedback that she got on it, and so that ended up becoming like a regular of finding a cigar that would pair good with the particular wines for the month. So all of that's part of my love, because it got me into writing about this, which we had been pairing cigars for a while, Red and I and the rest of the gang. But that got my love into writing about it, and the 4 Kicks was key to that. That having been said, tell us the story behind the 4 Kicks.
So 4 Kicks was the very first cigar that Crowned Heads released. And so there's meaning behind, the fact that it was our first cigar. John and Mike, who started Crowned Heads, Mike's been in the business since 1980. John's been in it since the early 90s. We all worked at CAO together, and after CAO was sold in 2007, we all stayed on until 2010. Come 2011, Mike and John were offered to go along with the new company. They declined, and they stayed in Nashville and created Crowned Heads cigars. And the name Crowned Heads comes from Wizard of Oz, actually. And so they reached out to a lot of different cigar makers, and all these cigar makers said, "Oh, I've got a bunch of cigars in the aging room. You design a band, we could throw your band on a cigar, or I can get your cigar whipped up in a week. What do you want?" They reached out to their old friend Ernesto Perez Carrillo. And Ernie, had owned La Gloria Cubana, had sold it, had led, started Tabacalera La Alianza, his factory in the Dominican with his kids, and he had launched EPC Cigars. And he wasn't making contract cigars, but he and John and him and Mike go way back. And Ernie said, "You know what? I'm going to make your cigar under one condition." And John and Mike said, "Yeah, what's the condition?" And they said, "You have to build the cigar. You have to pick out the fillers, the binders, the wrappers. I'm going to take you I'm taking you to the tobacco places. You're picking out the tobacco because this is your first release. It has to be special to you, and you have to build it. So as they're doing this, they're going through this process of creating crown heads and working on their first cigar. An unnamed person that worked for the company they turned down to join, who's no longer with that company, had said to someone, and it got back to them. They said, "Oh, they're going to fail. They're going to do horrible, and they're going to be coming back asking for a job with us." And so at the time, John Huber was listening to a lot of Kings of Leon. And Kings of Leon has a song called Four Kicks. And in that song, it basically says, you boys from the South, grab your switchblade posses. As boys from the North, grab your switchblade posses. As boys from the South, we're going to grab our guns. And basically go toe-to-toe. And so it was very much, and a lack of a better word, a big F-U to the man. And so Four Kicks was really born from that rebel attitude of carving your own path, our hashtag CYOP, about doing your own thing, about when everyone's going left, you go right. When everyone goes right, you go left. You carve your own path. You create your own future. You create your own success. And so that song by Kings of Leon, Four Kicks, really spoke to John. So when they created the first cigar, they named it Four Kicks. And they chose a very traditional, old school kind of Cuban cigar band, red and gold, two great colors.
Mm-hmm.
And Four Kicks was released. And Four Kicks to this day is one of our best-selling lines. Since then, Cigar Traveler there is smoking one of the versions called Capa Especial, which is a Sumatra wrapper. That blend has a little bit Dominican in the filler as well. That blend actually Ernie worked on. And so that blend, Four Kicks Capa Especial, is a compliment to the original Habano Four Kicks. And while we were making the first Four Kicks, obviously you color shade. And as you color shade, you say, all right, all the cigars that are going to release in Four Kicks have to meet one of these four shades of brown. Anything outside of that, that wrapper is deemed not the right color. Well, there were a lot of wrappers that were coming out of the pilons very dark. And so Ernie was setting those aside. And one day at the trade show, Ernie came to Mike and John and said, you know, all these dark wrappers, I'm setting them aside. We got to figure out something to do with these wrappers. They're great. They taste great. They're just a little bit dark for the Four Kicks line. The same day, Ernie is talking to John about exercise and working out. And Ernie says, man, are you doing these things? They're called mule kicks. And John says, no, I've never seen a mule kick. So he gets down, he jumps down, kicks his legs out, kicks his legs back and up. And, you know, Ernie's an old man. And Ernie said, those are mule kicks. So later on that day, John goes to Ernie and says, we're going to create a limited edition, fuller-bodied, fuller-strength Four Kicks, and we're going to call it Mule Kick. And that's where the Mule Kick came from. So you have your Four Kicks Capa Especial, and then you have the Four Kicks Mule Kick.
I can tell you that the Mule Kick goes really good with a full-bodied wine like a Syrah.
Mm-hmm.
And if you know your wines, the Syrahs from Northern Rhone Valley in France are phenomenal and have just got a lot of fruit-forward flavors, and it goes great with the Mule Kick. Which that stands to reason because they're coming out with the darker wrappers, so they fermented longer, and the longer through the fermentation, the more of the sweeter type notes that come forward in it.
Right.
And for us with the Mule Kick too, the first couple of years we released it, it was just a darker wrapper with an extra leaf of Lajero. But now we've got to have some fun with it, right? We've done a Mexican San Andres, we've done a broadleaf, we've done different wrappers to kind of complement that blend, and it's really went from being a limited edition, fun kind of side project to really its own brand now.
So let's get one more story. So Albert, who is our king of questions, and just to let you know, Albert is also part of the team. Albert is the one that is behind all of the graphics that we do. So the graphics that you've seen us in our promotions, this is the gentleman that creates it for us, and we are so thankful that he does this for us. Everything that everybody does is on a volunteer basis right now, and so we are so grateful for the team we have. He asks, can you tell the story, if there is one, about the La Imperiosa? Did I say that right?
Lampriosa.
Lampriosa. Okay, so
what's interesting
I'm going to say it Texan all day long.
I love it. I love it. Well, La Imperiosa is a cigar that we worked on. Was the 2014 Las Calaveras. In 2014, we released our very first Las Calaveras, and 2015, every year we knew the blend was going to change for Las Calaveras. But
Hmm.
in 2014, that blend meant a lot to John, and that was the first Las Calaveras. So John took kind of the bones of that blend and created a new brand and created what would become La Imperiosa, and that was released in 2015. A little different story behind that cigar. La Imperiosa is an old Cuban brand that was sold from the early 1900s to about 1930. And the brand died, it disappeared. And as John was doing some research on this old Cuban brand, there's a great printer out in Europe, and that printer has some of the oldest, best collection of old Cuban vistas and old Cuban printings from the 20s and the 30s and the 40s.
Oh,
And
wow.
they actually found a real La Imperiosa vista that went inside of a cigar box, and we have it in our office in Nashville, Tennessee.
Very cool.
The only thing we changed was the color, because the original La Imperiosa was red and gold, and we had already released the 4 kicks, so we chose Tiffany blue. And nobody in the
Hmm.
industry at the time was using Tiffany blue. Now AJ uses it, and a few other people use
Yeah.
it, but that was the first cigar. It was kind of that robin egg or Tiffany blue. And there's
Hmm.
3 stars on the band, and that 3 stars represent Tennessee because we're in Nashville, Tennessee. And so
Okay.
that is an ode to old Cuban brands and old Cuban cigar
Very
culture,
cool.
and it kind of pays respect to those who came before us, who created
Hmm.
brands, who helped develop the industry that we know today. So La Imperiosa, and it's made by the Garcias, who are Cuban, who are from
Hmm.
Cuba. And so it just made such a great connection to have the Garcias work on that cigar and create it and release it, and it has that connection to old Cuba.
I think we got a question from Zach here.
Yeah, Miguel, I got a question. Everybody has that one question they want to ask a cigar manufacturer, and this is my question. I'm always curious about the brain trust when you go in and you make a new cigar line. Like when you say, "Hey, I want to bring something out," uh, you know, do you give the master blender Miguel 3, 6, 9 months a year to, get the filler, get the binder together, and you and John and company get in a room together and smoke? Say, I like this one, I don't like this one, I like this one, I don't like this one. Tell me how Count Heads does that.
So there isn't one set way to do it. We have many different ways. Ernie has brought tobacco to us and said, "Hey, I've got some great tobacco. You guys should think about utilizing this." There's been other instances where we'll go complete, clean slate, and we build from the ground up. Sometimes John can really be infatuated with a particular tobacco and says, "I want to build a cigar around this." And as I tell everyone, sometimes where you start and you can see the end, but that journey takes you on a different path, because
Mm.
sometimes your mind and your palate will lead you, other times the tobacco will lead you. And so there are so many things that factor into that. Hey, if you want to make a broadleaf cigar, broadleaf is more readily available today, but it still isn't at the level that it was. So if you're going to make a broadleaf cigar, you're going to know that there's going to be some restriction on how many you can make, opposed to an Ecuador Habano, which is being grown in great numbers, and
Hmm.
you could use that leaf forever. And so all of that is a long story to basically say there isn't a certain way, but I can tell you that John heads up all of our cigars. John Huber creates, chooses, and John will tell you he is not a master blender. He's been in this industry forever, and he probably could call himself a master blender, but he says, "I'm not a master blender. I rely on our manufacturing partners, such as Iradio Pichardo or Jaime Garcia or
Mm.
Ernesto Perez Carrillo. And I
Hmm.
tell them what my vision is, and they help me create that vision. And through the whole process, John validates the work that they're doing with what he is looking for. That can take as little as 3 months, it could take a year. With our Mil Dias, which means 1,000 days, it literally took 3 years to work on that product.
Wow, I
And
didn't know that.
that's why it's called Mil
That's
Dias,
called
believe it
Mil
or not.
Diaz. Yeah.
And
that.
yeah.
Are we
Yeah.
sure that
I
that
read that one.
Aganorsa are we sure that Aganorsa and Terrence hasn't copyrighted and trademarked that validated line there?
Well, they sure do use it a lot. They sure do use it a lot. Well, and a lot of times it's with us when it comes to Las Calaveras, for example, sometimes the Garcias will say, "Hey, listen, we just got this wrapper in. It is beautiful. You guys should think about using it for Las Calaveras." And then John will say, "All right, well, this is the blend that I want. This is what I'm looking for. Put some of those wrappers on these and let me know." Or it can literally be, or Ernie will say, "What do you want? I'll go find it. What wrapper are you looking for? Where you want it grown? Where are you looking for this or that? Are you looking for Habano that's grown in Ecuador? Are you looking for Habano grown there?" So there is so much. There is no certain way to do it that we have. We literally every brand. The backstory is literally there's something that sparked it. Lampiriosa, the bones were already there because of Las Calaveras 2014. Where Jericho Hill, we went in thinking about another cigar, the Padron Aniversario. And then Juarez, which we went in completely blind and just said, we're going to build something. And so it really differs, because as well as as you're working on the blend, you can create a blend and then you set it for 3 months, come back to it, and it may not be exactly what you were hoping for. So then you need to tweak it. So it's a long process that you do. And what I love about John is the fact that he respects the master blenders. The truth is, there's probably only about 20 master blenders, true master blenders in our industry. Although weekend warriors will go down there, blend a cigar, and they'll call themselves a master blender.
No.
It's like
No.
it's. I always think of it as like Rachel Ray. Rachel Ray will always tell people. People say to Rachel Ray, "Oh, you're a great chef," and she'll say, "No. I didn't go to school for it. I'm not a chef. I'm a cook." And I think there's a respect level that we have for those people that have dedicated their life, like Ernesto Perez Carrillo, who literally grew up around tobacco and cigars. He is a true master blender. And what we do is we validate what we're looking for in the blends. And I hope I answered your question, but that's kind of a long-winded way of saying that there is no specific way. Every cigar, there is a something led us to that particular base, and then we grow from there.
Ernest is definitely one of my top 5 master blenders. I mean, he is
100%.
just off the hooks phenomenal in what he does.
Yeah, I think you really answered the question, Miguel. You're 100% right. When you blend a cigar and when you let it rest, then when it's after its aging process, it tastes totally different. I'm just curious because each cigar manufacturer has certain criteria, or they'll go through like 50 different blends before they finally find something. And Dave, when you see his humidor, he's got probably 2,000 cigars. He's
No, I don't.
I'm just busting his chops.
He's got 3,000 cigars.
I may have 200 cigars at this point in time. I was up there, but I may have 200.
Well, and I think I like to see how each cigar manufacturer ticks.
Yeah.
I like to see what works for them, because there's beauty in creating, just like when you take a old American muscle car and you rebuild it from the top up. There's a lot of love and a lot of restoration in that. With that tobacco, there's a lot of blending, and there's a lot of passion and personality that's put into the cigar lines. So I just want to see what makes Crown Heads tick.
Yeah. Well, something you touched upon there, and the fact that we saw there that Red has 6,000 cigars. That's incredibly impressive. You mentioned a muscle car, right? And rebuilding one. You can look at a muscle car. I don't need to look under the hood. I know that's a beautiful cigar. But
Hmm.
if you know cars, you want to see that under the
Yeah.
hood because you
Yeah.
understand how all the inner workings work, right?
Mhm.
Right.
And so I do think
Love
that's
cigar.
incredible. That's a great kind of analogy because cigars are a lot like that. You can look at a cigar on the shelf and go,
Hmm.
"Man, I love that. It's beautiful. It's the right
Hmm.
flavor." You can also go deep dive into the tobaccos. You can deep dive into where they were grown. You can deep dive into
Mhm.
Hmm.
who had them, who
Right.
because when Ernie gets tobacco from a grower, that grower may say that tobacco's ready. Ernie may get that tobacco and say,
It's like,
"No,
no, it's not.
I'm going to do another 3 or 4 months of fermentation on this." And so
Hmm.
that to me is what's beautiful because that really can get you into understanding the it's funny when people say, "Oh, this cigar has a lot of black pepper, that's a signature of the Garcias." Those are unique things that people can pick up and say, "Oh yeah, this reminds me, did Ernie work on this cigar?" and,
Right.
and it's a beauty. It's a handmade product,
Hmm.
and it can be as in depth as you want it to be.
Correct.
So
So,
let's take a little bit of a shift here if we can. Um, Red, do you want to go ahead with your question there,
no, I,
Corey?
I was no, I was actually going to ask how everybody's pairing was going. That's kind of how.
Great. So that's exactly where I was going. Great minds. So
Well, I saw Bert's question was like what was Miguel's favorite pairing. But before we get that, I'm interested to see the sangria because if it, you said you had the sangria. So I'm sitting there thinking, okay, is it oranges, strawberries, because there's different pears, cherries. So I was kind of curious about what fruits you have in that, what wine it was, and how it's pairing with your cigar.
Well, it's a Spanish sangria that is
Okay.
very fruit forward, and
Hmm.
citrus is the predominant flavor, and I would say orange.
Orange. Hmm.
Lot of orange, a lot of orange peel.
And it's in red
And
wine. Correct?
red wine, yep. It's a red
Hmm.
sangria, yep. And
Uh-huh.
white sangrias are real popular, and I haven't drank
mhm.
too many of those. I got to get into some white sangrias.
Yeah,
Um,
they're good.
what I like about tobacco is that there is a natural sweetness to a lot of tobacco.
Hmm.
And
Yes.
it's one of those things that can get very confusing when you're talking to consumers because there are flavored cigars, there are sweet tip cigars in the
Yeah.
industry, and when you say the cigar has a very natural sweetness, some people assume that you're adding sugar, you're adding some kind of glycerin that
Hmm.
has and so tobacco naturally has a nice sugar sweetness to it, and
Hmm.
a lot of Maduros, that Maduro process, that longer fermentation, the dark
It's
wrappers tend to have a very, very more sweet component to it.
right.
So this first cigar that I was smoking was the Le Petissier Connecticut Broadleaf.
Hmm.
Paired up absolutely fantastic. The natural sweetness of the sangria and the natural sweetness from that
Hmm.
broadleaf and the sweetness, the sugar content of the sangria helps a
Hmm.
little bit with the strength of a cigar. It kind of helps you whenever you get
Hmm.
that tobacco drunkenness, a little bit of sugar can go a long way. Halfway, I smoked that cigar. I had lit up before the show. I lit up a Osgener family Aramas, which is a Mexican San Andreas. That one did not pair up as well with the sangria.
I saw when
And
you lit it up, I was like,
it did not pair up as well. It did not
yeah.
pair up as well. So I would definitely say the first part of my pairing with Le Patissier was a
Hmm.
fantastic pairing. I'd highly recommend it. And the Aramas, I think the Aramas probably needs more something like a bourbon or a rum on the rocks
Yeah.
or something of that nature.
Or rye.
Really for that,
Yeah.
or a rye would be great as well.
Yeah.
I was going to say your favorite drink a rum, especially a nice
Hmm.
dark black molasses spiced
Hmm.
rum would be really good with it. A rye.
Hmm.
I would also go with I would go bold with an Islay.
Mm.
With the Islay
Oh yeah,
Scotch on it because
that would
that
go
is a
good with
nice
it.
bold cigar with that could stand up to it.
The Islay, now
Hmm.
help me. Islay has a lot of peat, right?
Islay is going to is going to have one of two things. It's going to either have a lot of peat, which that's your iodine medicinal front note that then transitions into your really strong herbaceous floral notes, or it could be a very smoky which it gives you the indication
Mm-hmm.
that they smoked that peat for longer, and so that
Mm-hmm.
smokiness kind of overtakes the peatiness of it. The peatiness is still always going to be there, so you'll have one of those two things, and I think that cigar would go really good with that and all of the other drinks that we have mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
So Zach, how is your pairing going? So you went with the four kicks and you have paired it with a blanco tequila.
It's very, very good. It is. I got a lot of cinnamon notes on it. The tequila didn't cancel the notes of the cigar out. Um, I got a lot of spice out of it. A lot of floral notes. I think the tequila really brought out um, the floral notes out of the tequila,
Hmm.
and it's a good pairing. I think I'm learning a lot from your tutelage there, Dave.
Awesome. Okay, so Red, you've been having the most complicated pairing out of all of us.
I
So
know.
please let us know how your pairing has been going.
And here's the thing, and it's like we always encourage people to pair, because you get different floral, you get different notes, you get different things. But when you really want to enjoy a cigar, I always say go with water because then you get notes that you have not picked up on it. Because it depends on what you've eaten that day. We talked about that, how many cigars you've had.
Hmm.
And today I've been working at the lounge. So despite what people think, you can't smoke all the time while you're working, especially doing pricings and doing that stuff. So I was cleaning out the humidor, putting the prices on. So only had one cigar today, and that was earlier. So and on this one, I hadn't really noticed. And like I said, two of my favorite Las Calaveras is the purple one, and I had bought. I think I bought like two boxes of them because they were just phenomenal, and the yellow one. And I've never really. I've gotten some sweetnesses, but I've always paired it with something. And I've gotten a vanilla, like a vanilla bean sweetness to it. And I don't remember it whenever I've smoked it. I remember tasting hints of sweetness to it, natural, and I want to say it's natural sweetness, kind of like how we were talking about.
Hmm.
But I've really enjoyed because I'm like, it's got that vanilla bean, but it's also got a little bit of just a cream of like a little bit of cream to coffee,
Mm,
if that makes sense.
yeah.
Oh
So,
yeah.
and I'm
So
sitting here trying to figure out. I don't remember what the wrapper binders and fillers were in this particular one, but I was like, man, alive, the yellow one, I just don't need to pair anything with it.
well, it's funny that you mentioned that because so I think I'm the only one except for with Miguel who's doing a double pairing here, and so I'm at the final third, and you can see I'm starting to get down to the nub on the La Patassiere, the baker. Um, and the first pairing with the Boulevardier went really good, but I finished my Boulevardier and I'm on to water. So now I'm doing the really complicated pairing that Red and Miguel is now doing with water. And through this, what I'm noticing that I was missing off of the front of this is that I'm picking up some what I would call really really deep cocoa notes. Now not chocolate because
Yeah.
chocolate is processed cocoa, right?
Hmm.
So the cocoa, you get that really bold, stark, um, little bit of hints of bitterness
Yep. Yep.
on it,
Hmm.
as where with the processed cocoa, where it's got the milk and everything else, and that kind of smooths that out. No, I'm getting very deep cocoa notes and coffee notes on this now, to where,
Hmm.
and I've been drinking this with the water, since about the middle third. Um, I wasn't getting that with the Boulevardier.
Hmm.
So that's telling me that the Boulevardier, with the strong fruit forward notes of it, that it was masking those deep,
Mm-hmm.
dark cocoa and coffee notes that are now
Mm-hmm.
really coming even forward. And like you with with the Las Calaveras, this is the first time I've ever actually paired it with water. And
Yeah.
so that is making me even more so want to go back and revisit this cigar all the
Mm-hmm.
way through with the water so you can
Mm-hmm.
see what the trueness of the cigar is being, was intended to be, and
Mm-hmm.
identify the full blend of it and the
Mm-hmm.
full experience of it.
And I'm gonna say because I've had that one with water, it is kind of like a sweet bread, like at the beginning. To me,
Yes.
it's kind of like that. It's like a sweet bread without it. But I also want to kind of talk about what one of my all-time favorites is the series that y'all have after the States, the Yellow Rose,
Yeah.
Tennessee Waltz, Buckeye, and then I can't remember what the one from Hawaii, but it had some new
Paniolo.
bands. Yes. So, love those series. If you haven't had a chance to experiment with them, because as we said, like for Yellow Rose, there were there was two. I want to say it was 2.5. It felt like
Yep.
20 years to me,
Yeah.
but I think it was 2.5 years that we didn't have it, and then it came back, and then just recently, y'all. I don't want to say re-released the Yellow Rose, but I mean that's kind of how it was because the tobacco, correct,
Yep. Was
is
available.
no
Yep.
longer is wasn't available anymore. And so I was excited to taste the difference between the two, which there is. I'm gonna say that there is a difference. It's for me personally, maybe because the first time that I had the yellow rose was with the original, but I'm still saying the second yellow rose is still box worthy. So if you wouldn't mind talking to us about that, and the Buckeye is
Well,
really good too.
before you
Okay.
get into that,
Mhm.
I kind of want to touch a little bit on what you said because now I missed out on the first runs of the Yellow Rose, and so I didn't experience the missing and the you know
I have
the
14 left.
I missed out on all of that grievance
Hmm.
process, and thank you, Lord, that I didn't have to experience that. But I did buy a box, which now I'm down to two of the new ones, but I did
Hmm.
have two or three of the original releases, which by or earlier releases, which by this time had like 5 or 6 years of age on it, and I smoked them both back to back, and I got to
Hmm.
say, it could be because of the age that I prefer the earlier ones, but both are great, and I agree that the new ones that are just come out within like in the past year are absolutely box worthy. So there's my little plug on it.
But and I
Tell
think
us.
it, but I do agree. I think with age on it, those are going to be phenomenal. So
Oh yeah.
I've set some back, not to smoke. It's like do not smoke because I'm excited to see how good it's going to be. If that
Well,
makes sense.
there's a reason why I'm not smoking my yellow rose tonight as well. But so we want to hear about that, and then let's get into your story about how you got into cigars, and what's your journey into cigars. You've touched a little bit on it, but let's after this, then let's get into your story.
Yeah. So Yellow Rose and Tennessee Waltz were really early on days of Crowned Heads.
Hmm.
Two of the states that really seemed to support us the biggest was our home state of Tennessee and the great state of Texas. We're huge supporters of Crowned Heads early on. And so John wanted to create a cigar that really honored those two cigar markets and the people that are in that market, the retailers and the consumers. So we worked with the Garcias on a broadleaf cigar, Nicaraguan filler binder for Tennessee. And we chose it's kind of a robusto with maybe a half inch extra length on it, and
Hmm.
we called it the Tennessee Waltz, which is a song, again
Hmm.
music inspired, and it just has an orange footband, orange representing the state of Tennessee, and it was extremely well received. While we were working on that, we were working on something for Texas, and the Yellow Rose of Texas is a song as well.
Mhm.
And our rep Brian McGee actually chose the size. It's a box press
Really?
torpedo. Brian chose the
Yeah.
size, and he was inspired by the shark Fuente. He loved that shark size, and it's not identical,
Mhm.
but it's
Right.
in that breath, if you
Mhm.
will.
Right. Yeah.
And so we created that 20 count box, Nicaraguan filler binder, Connecticut broadleaf for the for the Yellow Rose of Texas, and those were really a backbone in those markets for a very long time.
Mhm.
Very small production, and
Mhm.
again, those lines were really hit hard when the broadleaf
Mhm.
shortage came because they were broadleaf, so they were off the market for almost 3 years.
Yeah, I
And I
kept
would,
bugging Brian.
yeah, and
You
then
could ask Brian.
Brian would bug me, and then I would bug John and Mike and say,
Yeah,
"Come
I
on, you
was
guys."
just like, Brian, where's the
Yeah.
cat? He's like, I know.
And really the truth is that the Garcias have been able to get us a little bit of inventory. And when I say a little bit, I mean
Mhm.
very little.
It
But
was very
now,
limited.
yes,
Yeah.
very limited. But now I can tell you that we are now getting caught up, and it'll be a much
Yay.
more readily available. And like anything, every batch can be a little bit different. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? As you're releasing a cigar, and I'm from Ohio. Our CFO went to college in Ohio. John Huber's wife is from Columbus. So when I was in Ohio, we wanted to do something for Ohio. It was a completely different blend. I chose that size. Love that cigar. The interesting thing about Hawaii,
Yes.
it's not really a state exclusive, although we call it a state exclusive, but it's
Mhm.
really for one retailer, Our Field Wine in
Yes.
Hawaii.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
every year that blend changes. Like Las Calaveras, every year that blend changes. So
Oh, okay.
with Paniolo, every year you have to look at where we made it and what the blend was, because every year we like to switch it up. Where Yellow Rose and Tennessee Waltz is always made by the Garcias, always the same blend, always the same Vitola.
Okay, so we got to take a little break because there's a conversation going on in the chat that's absolutely hilarious. So it started out with Red has 6,000 cigars. Then our good friend Chris Culture comes back and said, I thought she had more cigars than shoes, but won't
I
be the
do.
last time I was wrong.
No, you're
Uh,
right.
Albert comes back and says, I have more shoes than her cigars. And Chris
Also,
closes it up with, Crocs don't count.
no, they don't. But no, and Chris, you're absolutely right. I have way more cigars than I do. It's not quite to 6,000 yet. I will say that, but I would rather have more cigars than shoes. I'm not, but I do have, well, no, I don't really have that many pairs of shoes. I probably have about like 20 pairs. So that
Fortunately,
for a woman,
I
or 40. So for a woman, that's not very big. Like when I was growing up, like in my 20s and all that stuff, I had probably about 500 pairs of shoes. It was ridiculous. So yeah, and now it's changed towards cigars.
There you go.
fortunately I do have more cigars than shoes because I think I own like 6 pairs of shoes,
Yeah.
and 4 of them are some type kind of boots or not. So so let's start this off. Miguel, do you remember the very first cigar you ever smoked?
I do. I remember first premium hand rolled cigar I ever smoked. I remember.
Ooh, okay.
It was at the end of 1995. I walked into a Tinderbox in Cincinnati, Ohio. I put $20 on the
Very
counter,
good. Yeah, great,
and I
great
said,
shop.
give me your most expensive cigar." I said, and the guy said, "Well," he said, "I just got these cigars in, and they're from Fuente, and it's a very rare cigar they're going to come out with." And it was the very first release of Opus, but they came in a slide top box before they came in the box in '96
Oh,
Oh,
with the fancy box that we know today.
yeah.
The very first shipment of them came in a slide top box, and I had the Perfection, the torpedo, the big torpedo.
oh wow.
I took the cigar home, went to my garage with my brothers, my older brothers' friends, and we smoked it like a joint. We all took puffs
Oh
and
my.
did not smoke it the way you should smoke a cigar. So
that is fun. That is funny. So it was a puff puff pass type situation, huh?
it was. We didn't really know the inner workings of a cigar. We didn't really
Hmm.
understand the components and everything. We just knew that coming from a Latino culture, cigars are very popular. And so family members, uncles
Hmm.
smoke cigars. It was just part of the culture growing up.
Yeah.
And it was something that I always loved and admired, and I loved the aroma. And when I got into it, I was then held longer
Hmm.
by understanding the culture and understanding the craftsmanship. And so I
Hmm.
do remember my very first cigar.
Now the
Well,
question is, did you guys move into Cheech and Chong mode and going, oh man, dude, you just got it. You just don't know how this is hitting me, man.
It was so strong at that time. I think all of us were very lightheaded.
Love it, love it.
But outside of that, my first cigar I ever smoked was a Philly Titan. A Philly Titan. In '94, I picked up a 4-pack or a 5-pack for, I think, $2. And you didn't need a cutter because they already came pre-cut. And it was a homogenized wrapper. It was horrible, but I just knew it was cool.
yeah. Well, I'm glad that your palate has changed back.
Yes, yes.
Hmm.
My palate I'm staying with you. I'm very much happy that I did not stay there.
Yeah,
So what?
and we are too.
Yeah. So how did you get in the industry? Did it become like as I'm assuming like okay, you enjoyed smoking the cigars, and so I mean, uh, so what made a change to where you didn't get the 5 pack that were pre-cut into
Well,
different cigars?
I started going back to the cigar shop and started buying a cigar every week. And
Hmm.
the 10 friends in the garage became 9 friends, and became 8 friends, became 7
Hmm.
friends, and 4 friends, and eventually pretty much by myself smoking a cigar and then learning about it. And at that time, Cigar Aficionado was the only source of information. There weren't blogs, there weren't other
Hmm.
magazines, there weren't
Yeah.
podcasts on cigars. It just didn't exist.
Hmm.
And so I bought my first humidor from there as well. And 1998, I fell in love with a cigar called
Hmm.
the CAO Lenivisar Maduro.
Oh my goodness!
At the
Wow,
at
talk
the
about
time,
memories.
yeah, at the time it was made by Doug Paringer down in Costa Rica. He made it for only a year, for the whole year of '98. He made it. '99, the production went to Perdomo, and then I think in 2000, the production went to Toronto, where it stayed until the company was sold. And I fell in love in '98 with the CAO. And I looked up their ad. I saw their ad, and I wrote the company and told them how much I loved their brand.
Hmm.
Went to the Chicago Big Smoke in '98 and hung out at their table and just bugged the hell out of them, fanboying. And I got to meet Tim Osgener, who was the vice
Hmm.
president of the company at the time. His father was the president, John Osgener, rest in peace.
Hmm.
And I would always joke with him. '98, '99, 2000. We became kind of phone friends, and I would go see him at the Big Smoke, and I'd say, "One day I'm gonna work for you. One day I'm gonna work for you." And I think it was in 2001. He said, "Hey, I'm coming to Cincinnati for an event. I know you live in Cincinnati. I don't have a job I can offer you, but I can offer you an interview." They were going from brokers to in-house sales guys. Now,
Okay.
at this time, Perdomo was still using brokers. Drew Estate was still
Hmm.
using brokers. The only in-house guys at this time were General, Altidus, Fuente Newman, Davidoff, and I think Ashton. Everybody else was using brokers. So it was
Hmm.
very Rocky was using brokers, and they were going to go all in-house sales force. So they got me an interview. So I want to say 2002. I came on board. I represented Ohio, Indiana, Michigan, Kentucky, and had a lot of success with them. Was with them for 7 years. 2 out of those 7 years were Salesman of the Year, and absolutely loved it. Fast forward to today. Tim Osgener is part owner of Crown Heads,
Hmm.
and and Mike and John worked at CAO. I'm basically working for the same guys.
Yeah. And that's one thing is like I think it's a really cool story is like if you read the stories of in stock y'all like I've done. you find that many of y'all were with CAO, and then y'all came together for here. And I don't want to say you took your team, but I mean, basically that's what kind of happened
Yeah.
on that
I, I
one.
I
So,
think it's funny how when we talk to people, CAO is very well known, but CAO for a long time, really until they became part of the General and the S2G family, was considered a very small, very small offering brand, and
mhm,
people didn't really know how much of an impact that the Ozinger family and CAO had on the industry,
mhm,
especially
mhm,
in the mid late 90s and early 2000s, which
mhm,
was
Yeah.
really pivotal into taking cigars to where we are now. And the Ozinger
right,
family
A
was
hundred
was
percent.
key.
A hundred
yeah,
percent. Because at the time the boom was ending in '97. The boom was
mhm,
dying, and a lot of
right,
these small boutique brands were dying off, and CAO
mhm,
survived. And
mhm,
with look, I mean, even some of the packaging, tobacco, we were using Italian tobacco, we were using Brazilian tobacco, which people were using Brazilian tobacco but calling it something else.
mhm,
Um, they had a lot of innovation and a lot of uniqueness.
right,
They created CAO flavors. They were flavored cigar line that were the Godiva chocolate of flavored cigars.
mhm,
Because at that time, a lot of flavored cigars were dipped, where these were infused. And
mhm,
so CAO was really on the cutting edge of a lot of design. And I think that's why ultimately they were purchased. And we were all there, had a fantastic time. I learned so much working for the Osgood family. They took so
mhm,
good care of me when I was there.
mhm,
And so through my journey from there, I got to work with Tarano cigars.
Okay.
Tarano was making a lot of cigars for CAO. Um, we were distributing Tarano the last couple of years we were there. So I got to work with Charlie Tarano. So I went kind of within the same family, became a
mhm,
national sales manager there. We built up a very great team, became great friends with Jack Tarano, who's now with Espinosa,
Yep.
and learned a ton about being a national sales manager there. Then after they sold to General Cigar, there's a theme here.
yeah,
Uh, I worked for a little company called Duran Cigars, who was owned by a good
mhm,
friend of mine. And Duran, people were really surprised when I went there because he was such a small operation. But what Roberto did was Roberto said, "I'm going to take you to the factories, but instead of just being a person there watching, you're going to understand tobacco. I'm going to teach you about tobacco." And then he took me and taught me how to the international cigar business.
mhm,
And so I learned that part. And then when my buddies John and Mike grew Crown Heads to a point, they said, "Listen, we need a national sales guy." And to join back up with Tim, Mike, and John,
mhm.
who I worked with at CAO, was a dream come true. And I joined them as a national sales manager, and here I am, 20 plus
And
years in the business.
that's awesome. And so it was last year or the year before with Oz, with the Oz family
Last year.
cigar. Is it last
Yep.
year at
Last
PCA?
year.
Okay,
Yep.
so let's kind of talk about that because you are smoking one of his.
Yep.
So and also does Crown Head and he have coming up for PCA as well?
So Tim Osgoner literally
Hmm.
grew up in the tobacco business. John
Hmm.
Osgoner, his father was a Turkish Armenian immigrant, went to school at Columbia University, New York, moved to Nashville, Tennessee, working for DuPont as a chemical engineer. But his hobby
Okay.
was smoking pipes, and he was from Turkey, and so he smoked meerschaum pipes. And
Ooh.
him being an
Hmm.
engineer, he hated the quality of the pipes that were coming out of Turkey. The holes weren't drilled right, the pieces would break and crack, and so as an engineer, he would tinker at home, buy pipes,
Hmm.
fix them, and going into tobacco shops buying tobacco and buying pipe cleaners in the early 60s, people would say, "Man, I really like your pipe." And Jono would tell the story that, as an immigrant, you never turn down a job or you never turn down an order. So when a
Hmm.
store said, "Hey, can you get me 20 of those pipes?" Jono said, "Absolutely, I'll get you 20 of these pipes." So Jono would call his family in Turkey. They'd send him the pipes. He would engineer them and he would sell them to these retail stores. Well, eventually they said, "Can you put your initials in these pipes so people know they came from you?" And Jono's initials are CAO.
Hmm.
So Jano, spelled C-A-N-O, but pronounced Jano. Rat is his middle name, and Osgener was his last name. So CAO. So in 1968, they created the CAO Pipe Company. In the
Right.
80s, they got into humidors. In the 90s, they got into cigars. By the time we left, 99% of our sales came from cigars.
Right.
And Tim
And I,
Osgener
and I
was a
don't think a lot of people realize that he started out with pipes, and that's
yep,
where his initials were.
yep,
So yeah.
yep. And so Tim ran CAO, made CAO the company that it was when it sold. And Tim has always been an investor in Crowned Heads from day one. Tim had a non-compete, so he couldn't be in the business for a while.
Hmm.
He had a big
It was a long
warehouse,
while.
a long while. We had a big corporate office in Nashville that they didn't sell when they sold CAO. So his father Jono had a love for art, and so they turned it into a nonprofit visual
Hmm.
and performing arts center. If
Hmm.
you Google Oz Arts Nashville, you'll see it's one of the top attractions in Nashville.
Hmm.
And for the last 10 years, he's been working on that. During this whole time, smoking cigars, being involved in the backside of Crowned Heads. And Tim said, look, when I get this nonprofit really founded and
Hmm.
strong, I want to get back to what I love, and that's cigars. So 2 years ago, 3 years ago almost, Tim started working on the design for his re-entry into the industry. And CAO was his father's company they sold. So his company is called OFC, Osgener Family Cigars. And so now Tim is back in the industry. He has two cigars out right now.
Hmm.
One is called Bosphorus. The Bosphorus is made by Ernesto Perez Carrillo. It has Ecuador Habano 2000 wrapper. It is made by Ernesto Perez Carrillo, and the story is the Bosphorus Strait goes right through Istanbul, Turkey, where his mom is a Turkish. She's a Turk, and so that cigar is really in honor of his mom, and
Hmm.
references one of the most important straits in the world. It's the busiest strait in the world, in fact. It
Hmm.
separates Europe from Asia. It's a really unique place in the world, and it represents his mom's roots. His father is also from Turkey, but he is not Turkey, he's Armenian.
Hmm.
And so his second cigar he came out with is called Aramas. There is a mountain in Armenia, and it is called Masis by the locals. And it is called Mount. Oh, Aramas. I forget the name. I lost my train of thought. But he took the word Arama. He took the word Masis and Erat and created the word Aramas. And that cigar is in honor of his father
Hmm.
from his Armenian roots. His father was Christian, his mother was Muslim.
Hmm.
And they created this. And so if you look at the vista of the box, one side is the Bosphorus Strait, one side is Mount Ararat.
Oh wow.
In the middle of the box, there is the Statue of Liberty.
Hmm.
His family left
Hmm.
Turkey and immigrated to the United States. So they met in New York. His mother went to college in New York at one of the schools there. She's an educator, and
Woohoo.
also in that you'll see the mountains, and those mountains represent Tennessee. And so it tells the story of his family
Of his
from
family.
their trip from being Armenian, Turkey, and remember those two cultures are
Not. Yeah.
diametrically opposed.
They don't get along, to
They
say it nicely.
they do not get along. But his mother and father met in New York, and they
Hmm.
both had this love for education, this love for freedom, this love of the United States, and they created a family there. They were both planning on
Hmm.
going back, but they stayed in the United
Hmm.
States and moved to the Bible Belt of
Yeah.
America.
Wow.
And religion or the bloody history of the Armenian and Turks background did not affect the
Hmm.
love that they shared. They had a
Hmm.
shared value. They had shared value in education and love for this country. And so that is really the foundation of Oz Family Cigars.
Yeah. And I thought it was like one of the most beautiful tributes for his first two cigars that he did, that he paid homage and respect to where he came from and his family. and actually heard him tell the story, and he gets a little teary-eyed,
He
which is
does.
even more, special, I think,
Oh, there it
because
is, right there.
yes,
That's
There it
uh,
is. And so we could see the both sides of it, and the father and the
mhm,
mother there. So that is
mhm,
fascinating. What a story.
And you
mhm,
can see the imagery. There's stars in there that
mhm,
relate to kind of his mother's Muslim background, his father's Christian background, and in the stars, it all has meaning. And he
mhm.
worked on that for almost 2 years before he started
Yeah.
working on the cigar. And the colors on his mother's side are red and white, and that is the colors of Turkey. And the colors
Mhm,
of Armenia are orange, red, and blue. And so it
mhm,
all comes together. And that's truly what cigars have always been.
mhm. Yeah.
So that brings us to something else that we always talk about with all of our guests, especially in the cigars, is around the culture of cigars. And I'm coining the term. I think I can coin this term
Mhm. You
now,
can.
Red.
You can. You
Um,
can.
but I always call the cigars the great equalizer.
Yes.
And you've talked about a little bit about the culture from the industry side of it, of how, how you kind of come full circle of, with the different brands, and you've come back to your family with the Ozinger and with John and with Crown Heads. How do you see how do you see the culture both being on the business side as a national sales manager and having 20 plus years of industry, in the industry, and also being part of the cigar community? How do you see the culture from where it started out to where it is now?
Look, I think culture of this industry is very important, and I take it very important. I am but a grain in the history of tobacco because tobacco is a natural. It comes from the Americas, the indigenous people, the Tainos, the Awak,
Mhm,
the Mayans, the Incas.
mhm,
Tobacco is distinctly American,
mhm,
and so as the cigar culture was something that was introduced to Europeans in 1492, upwards
mhm,
about
Hmm.
1500s, and
mhm,
it truly tobacco truly conquered the world. And cigar culture that has really carried on from the 1800s to today. We all, either you're working in an industry, you're a hobbyist, you're a business
mhm,
owner of a cigar shop, whatever you are carrying a flag that was carried for you by previous
mhm.
generations.
Right?
And it is all of our duty to continue to educate and to share the love of this culture. People who don't know cigar smoking will always ask me, are cigars addictive? And I
Mhm,
said, no, but if you do start smoking cigars, you'll be addicted by the culture because you'll
mhm,
meet people that you never thought you would meet.
mhm,
You'll spend time with people you'd never get a
mhm,
chance to meet. That you'll love of handmade product. We all have this. I was in Albuquerque for a weekend with my family.
okay.
We went to a Native American
Mhm,
cultural center. And the
mhm,
thing that caught my eye the most was the pottery, right?
mhm,
A handmade piece, hand
mhm,
painted. We all, within all of us, there's this love of handmade. We
mhm,
appreciate the burger. I go hang out with you, Red, and you go out on your grill and you make me a burger and
mhm,
you grounded the burger and you put your
mhm.
seasoning and spice. I will appreciate burger so much more than if I go to McDonald's.
Yeah.
There is a deep love that we have for handcrafted, and this culture really lends ourselves to it. So
As long as you get that burger, when she makes it and she doesn't put it in the freezer for you, to deliver it to you later, because then you may not get it.
I feel there's a story there.
Oh,
Yes.
there's a story.
But I look, I think that we're all very blessed to be in this business. And as I stated
Mhm,
before, the 80s, the industry almost disappeared here in the
mhm,
States. And after the Cuban Revolution, look, cigars were already being rolled in the Dominican and Nicaragua,
mhm.
Honduras, but not on the
Right.
scale it was in Cuba.
No.
The Cubans that left because they were forced out, and a lot of them didn't just cash in and say, I'm giving this up. Many of them said, I'm going to make this work. I'm going to reestablish this somewhere
Mhm,
else.
Hmm.
We all have, I think, a responsibility to smoke cigars, be responsible. I'm not a
mhm,
guy, I don't like to take pictures in front of signs that say no smoking. Listen, you don't want me smoking there. I don't want to smoke there.
Right, exactly.
I think us as a cigar culture, I think we're very respectful, hardworking people. We love what we do, and we love sharing what we do. I tell everybody. I wrote an article years and years and years ago for a website, and it still gets brought up once in a while. It's called the 10 Cigar Commandments. You can find it online. But one of the commandments is always have an extra cigar on you, because you never know when you're going to meet another aficionado who really is in a bind, who doesn't have a cigar, or you have an opportunity to introduce somebody to something. For crowned heads and for myself, if we can give more to the culture, to the industry than we take, that is what defines you, I think, as a great cigar maker.
I think I've told this story before, and I want to tell this story again. Of a time that I was at a tavern, and I went in, grabbed a scotch, and I'm sitting out on their patio, and because we were allowed to smoke out on their patio, and I've got a cigar, and I've got like 5 cigars with me, because again, I don't, I always bring extra. If I get smoke them while I'm there, great. If I give them out, even better. And I'm sitting there, and there's about 2 or 3 people that's come in, and they ask if they can join my table, and I'm like, sure. I had no idea who these people were.
Yep.
They started talking with me about my cigars, and one of the guys goes, man, I wish I would have brought mine up here if I'd known somebody was up here. And so I offered him one of my cigars. After about an hour, there's 20 of us sitting around the table. And so we actually bring 2 other tables. There's a big round, cast, metal
bar table,
yeah, typical bar, wired metal tables. And so there's about 20 of us sitting around there. This is going to get into a little bit on the faith stuff, because and I'm not ashamed of my faith. This one guy from Portugal comes up, and we were talking about photography. We were talking about faith and stuff, and he sits down, because my background's in photography and marketing and advertising, even though IT's paid the bills for 30 years. He comes up and sits down, and we were talking photography, and as things start dissipating out, he starts talking to me about faith, and he goes, so you're religious? And I said, no, I'm a Christian. And he goes, what's the difference? So we get in talking about that, all because of the cigars.
Yep.
End up meeting up with this guy for like the next 6 weeks until COVID hits. And we're talking about faith, and find out that he's an atheist. And I always say that if you can find a common ground, and you can have a conversation, and through that conversation you can get the atheist to start asking questions, and you've piqued their curiosity. And that would not have happened without this right here. Because
100%.
I've sat out on patios, I've sat there, with a drink, and I've sat there by myself for hours. But because I had a cigar, a conversation started. The great equalizer.
Yeah.
Some of the best Christians I know started as atheists.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I've had people ask both Red and I and Matt, our other partners, so are you guys a Christian company? I said, no, we're a company that's owned by Christians. And there's a difference. We're not afraid to speak our faith, but we're not going to push it down anybody's throats. What we do is what we've been talking about all night long. Is we talk about cigars, we talk about whiskeys, wines, coffees, teas, and pairings, and we utilize that as a vehicle to grow the culture, to be a part of the culture, and to be a part of a greater community, the community of humans.
100%.
And I think that, because like you were talking about, like when, like the 80s cigars almost disappeared, and it came back, if you think back, it was like when the legislation in the Supreme Court was like tobacco's bad, tobacco's evil, and all this stuff. And my family, we actually grew tobacco. So we come from, that was big, and we took a big hit in the 80s.
Yep.
And it seemed like everything was like, even cigars are bad, everything is bad because of, Camels and Marbles and all the advertising, and it had to change. And then I remember I had my first cigar in 97. So it was back when you could smoke at 18, 19, so I was legal of age. And I'm glad that it's made its comeback. And been one of the few women who've actually, there's not been very many of us who smoked from the 90s.
Yeah.
It's kind of like they kind of looked at it and it was kind of like a cliche kind of
Yeah.
thing. Oh,
Yep.
I like cute with it in my hand. I'm not going to take it serious kind of a thing. And then as it's grown, it's, with me, it's very rare, because I work in a shop. I'm working on my certified retail tobacconist right now. I finish up in 2.5 weeks. And so I'm going to give a shout out for the Cigar Lounge for allowing me. I've met up with Brian McGee and a couple of his events, things like that. And it's a community that wants people to succeed. It doesn't matter if you're female or male,
Yep.
and it's been the support. It's been a beautiful growth thing to see. But it's like what we were talking about earlier, people that I normally would not hang out with, because I'm in education. There's not very many educators who smoke cigars
Hmm.
uh, in it, and I wouldn't have met Greybeard. That's one thing. I wouldn't have met Philip. I wouldn't have met the people that come to the lounge. I wouldn't have been able to go to the underground. I wouldn't have met McGee, and I normally wouldn't have hung out with these people, and I wouldn't have gained the knowledge that I've had if it weren't for a simple thing. Even though I come from a family that has grown the tobacco that
Yep.
you use in your pipes, that you use in your cigars. Um, so it's amazing how it brings it together. And then when you hear stories, and you're able to sit down. And the thing I love about the cigars is you may disagree with somebody, but when you're smoking a cigar, it kind of puts that calmness. It kind of, because I don't think I've ever been angry when I've smoked a cigar. I
Yep.
mean, I might have been angry before I had my cigar, and then I smoked the cigar and it calmed me and it made me think, and it makes you rationalize through things and it changes your thought process
Yeah.
about things.
Yep.
And I think that's why you can have those conversations with people that you don't normally agree with or you wouldn't really hang out with them,
Yeah.
is because you're sitting there and you're taking the time to listen.
100%.
You can't rush. I mean, you can rush through a cigar, but are you going to enjoy it? No, you're
Right.
not. And the people that go into a cigar lounge or they go and they smoke on a patio or they're smoking somewhere else, they're doing it because they want to enjoy it. They want to take that time and really get to think and process through things. So,
100%. I keep coming back to two stories about cigars, and I've been smoking cigars for 31, almost 32 years now, and got introduced to them by a youth pastor that I used to work with and working with at-risk kids. Um, but right after my divorce, and I was in counseling, my counselor said, "So what are you doing for yourself?" And I said, "Well, I smoke my cigars, and so I spend my time, getting back into smoking my cigars in the morning with my coffee and my Bible." And he goes, "Good, don't ever stop."
Yeah.
And I'm like, why? And he goes, because cigars. And this guy didn't smoke cigars, but it really kind of made me realize what it was doing for me. He said cigars make you slow down,
Yeah.
and it makes you process, and it makes you work through whatever it is, because you can't rush a cigar.
well,
And I was
if
like,
you,
go
oh,
ahead.
go ahead. I was going to say, if you post what Chris just said, if you post a cigar is an investment in my time, which is
Yes.
what you were saying.
Yes, 100%, 100%. And this kind of goes down a different discussion about a lot of the myths in the cigar industry about how it's bad for your health. And it is funny, you wrote an article about the Ten Commandments of cigars. I wrote an article about 2 years ago called "Why I'm Not a Smoker But I Smoke," and it's talking about the differences between cigarettes and cigars,
Yeah.
and all of the myths that the FDA publishes. Well, back in 2020, October 2020, and Zach can testify to this because he was there when I got extremely sick, and Red was as well. I got extremely sick to where I almost lost my life because of COVID. and was in the hospital for a week. I mean, it was touch and go for a few moments there. And as all the doctors are coming in, and when you're that sick, you've got a lineup. It's almost like there's a line of take a number for the next doctor to come in and ask you the same damn 20 plus questions.
Yeah.
And they always ask you, do you smoke? And every time my answer was yes. I smoke cigars. Okay, how many? 7 to 10. 7 to 10 a month? No, 7 to 10 a day. And I was smoking 7 to 10 cigars a day. In fact, during that year, Red and I calculated, and 2020 and 2021, we had calculated that we had probably smoked, 12 to 1,500 cigars throughout the year. So we're building all of this up. And every single one of them said, okay. It's like they just said, okay, nothing else about it. And finally got to the last doctor, and she was the respiratory therapist. And I said, why do you guys keep saying okay? And said, because cigars don't impact your health the way cigarettes do.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, okay, so the medical industry understands this. And the funny thing is that the internist medicine, who really is the one, I mean, he was the infectious disease and internal medicine doctor. He's the one that really kind of saved my life because he put me on just this really strong steroid that rebuilt my lungs. And he was one of the ones that talked about it. And 2.5 years later, I see him again, not knowing that I'm seeing him again for a completely different reason, because I got an infection inside the bone on my elbow, and that was a real ordeal. And I see him again. He goes, I remember you. You had COVID, and I was one of your doctors, and you had talked to me about cigars. I said, oh, yeah, I remember you. And he goes, yeah, I started taking up cigars, smoking cigars, because of what you told me it did for you. And I was like going, boom, there it is.
Mhm.
There's the culture right
Yeah,
there.
There it is. Yeah.
That's a
And-
blessing,
and-
man.
And I think it's like when you start smoking a cigar and when you start doing it, you don't realize, like how you were saying at first there was 10 in the garage, then 9, 8, 7,
Yeah.
6, 5. It dwindles down because not everybody has the same passion or drive or whatever
Yep.
that you might have. But and I think that's kind of like why we come together, is because it's something that we really enjoy. And the community is a beautiful community. They're very giving. They try to do things. They try to invest into their community and outside of their community into the world.
Yep.
And I think that's why it's growing again. Is because
Yeah.
we all want to be a part of something, and people are realizing, oh wow, when I come to the cigar lounge or when I come and sit, it's a time, and sometimes you don't even have to say anything, and it's okay. You
Yeah.
don't have to go in and talk to somebody, but it's interesting, if you choose to do so, who you're going to meet and what you're going to learn. Like, some of the, like today, I had no idea about the Juarez and Jericho Hill backstory of that. So I was excited to learn about that. So
That was
you get to
fascinating.
learn. Sometimes you nerd out, and sometimes you talk about just what's going on in real life. And some people might be having struggles, and you build that family, and then that family kind of takes care of your family in the end. So
So let's close this out on still talking about the culture, and I want to go around the room, and we're going to start off. I want to put the quiet one on the spot here and start off with Mr. Cigar Traveler. But the question I want each of us to answer, and Miguel will finish with you, is what, speaking of the culture, because in everything in life, we see things that we would like to see change in the culture. And so, Mr. Cigar Traveler, Zach, what is something that you would like to see change within the cigar culture?
Well, first off, I'm the quiet one because they haven't told you, Miguel. This is my second podcast. I organize them and I help network everything, and I get with awesome men like yourself and women like yourself. And
Wait a minute, Miguel's not a woman.
No, he's not a woman, but he's a guy. But I'm saying there's ladies in the industry as well.
Yes.
Yeah, I network and I set these up, but I am just learning from two of the best, Greybeard and Ash Red. I'm trying to glean off of their wisdom here. So
Very
props to
good.
both of them. But to answer that question, I'm going to quote my friend Ruben. He is from Chad, and I get to smoke with him probably once or twice a week. And what he says is America versus European culture is backwards. It's inverted. Okay? In Africa, if you say you want alone time, people look at you like you're crazy. It's community first, then individualism. In America, it's opposite. Individualism, then community. And he says, Zach, you're West African. And I go, what? And he goes, you have a mentality that is not American. And I'm like, I guess I'll take that as a compliment. And he's like, it is a compliment because you're all about community. Change that I would like to see is basically where it's community first and individual second. Like, I am what kind of borrowing of what you said, Greybeard. I am a guy that smokes cigars. I'm not a cigar smoker. I am a guy that smokes cigars. I seek first fellowship.
Yep.
Community. This is a prop. This is a conduit.
Yeah.
It's a conduit to fellowship. I want to smoke with a lot of cigar smokers. And I want to fellowship. I'm an extrovert, so that definitely helps. My wife is an introvert. My recharge time is fellowshipping with other cigar smokers across the country and across the globe.
That's
in
beautiful.
a few countries.
Yes,
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah. So when we start going global, I want to go to cigar lounges and I want to sit down. That is my pastime. That is my hobby. That is my passion. It is for community first and individualism second. I have more than enough individual time. I want fellowship. And a cigar lounge that Greybeard is not and Ash Red's not shy about, underground, they get that. They get that. They're there for each other. We smoke together, good times, bad times. We get each other through hard times. That is what I would like to see as far as the change is concerned. And I am busy, just like Red and Greybeard are. But if a brother or sister of the Leaf calls me up and says, "Hey, let's get together, let's get a smoke," 9 times out of 10, the answer is yes. Because I've always got time for a smoke. I've always got time for community and fellowship.
Nice.
Perfect. Love it. So Miss Red.
Man, I'm just excited to say that I've seen the change. And some people are going to come like, oh, here you go on your. I'm actually wearing my Women Who Smoke Cigar shirt, so it just kind of. But it's just been a beautiful growth, especially within the last 2 years. So COVID has hit. You see, like the Sister of the Leaf global movement. That's something that that I'm a part of. I've seen women more jump on podcasts. I want to say I was one of the few women who first started with podcasts. I don't remember any other women really doing podcasts regularly. Um, so to me, I'm seeing my change, and it's kind of like when we first started, and it's like now it's not because of who I am when I walk into lounges. And yes, people kind of, especially around locally, they know who I am. Um, but I think it's like I've seen that. I've seen women go out and create their own cigars, they're blending, and they're just becoming powerhouses. So to me, I'm seeing my change and living that change. And it's a gorgeous change. And they're getting the respect that they deserve. Sometimes you come across um, non-educated cigar smugglers or people who assume things, and we know what happens when you assume things. Makes an ass out of you. And
Ah.
so I'm gonna like relish in this moment because like 2 to 3 years ago, uh, I didn't see that.
Yeah.
Um, and for me, I'm just gonna say I'm loving the movement that it's going in. So I'm excited to see more changes for it. So I'm gonna go with that because like that's been my passion. It's been that way for several years, and I think I've seen it more here within the last year, really last 6 months. It's just really picked up. So that's what I'm gonna go with. I want to keep it. I'm seeing it. I just want to keep that current going, if that makes
Yes.
sense. Hmm.
Well, I highly respect your humbleness, your humility that you portray in that red, and having been a partner with you through a big part of this journey and where we've seen it when you and I first started this, really before we really officially formulated Leaf and
Hmm.
Grain Society, we saw that women were not as respected as they are now. It seems in the
Hmm.
industry, especially in the social media aspect of it.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And I will come out and say, I don't have to be humble. I don't have to show humility in this. I am going to give credit where credit is due. And you have absolutely been a huge impact on that. And I think a reason behind why that has grown. And so much respect to you for that. I think for me, one area that I still see, and we saw this a lot as you and I were going around and hitting up our cigar shops, especially in the DFW area. And we've seen it in different lounges that we've gone to, is that there seems to be a still uh, an aura of judgment, initial judgment when you come into the lounges,
Hmm.
especially when you come into a lounge that already has a really established
Hmm.
clientele. The clientele seems to immediately judge you. And I was a part of that as well. I'll tell you right off the bat. When I first met Zach, we met at a men's retreat, retreat expedition
Hmm.
adventure type thing. And when he first came up to me and was smoking cigars, my first judgment of him was that, oh, this guy's a poser. Well, I can tell you right off the bat that this guy is not a poser. I love him. He's a dear brother of mine. I would go to the end of the world for this man right here because he already has for me, and I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for him being there for me. But I learned I learned how not to judge because of him and different things. But I still see it when we come into lounges, and not on me because here in this area I am very well recognized as what Red is, but I remember going into a lounge and Red and I are in the humidor, and Red was immediately judged because she was a woman that she doesn't know. And I would like to see that part of the culture changed where that starts to dissipate even more when you go into a new lounge where there's an established clientele or even the tobacconists that they don't immediately place judgments on you because of your gender or because you're male or female or because of how you may dress or what have you that goes away. So Miguel, close us out on this part of the discussion, and then we're gonna close. Then we're gonna wrap this up.
Well, I think for me, I think they always say be the change that you want to see, right? So I've seen a lot of things change over the last 20 years, and I think a lot of things will continue to change. What I love seeing, I love seeing that the growth of women cigar smokers, the growth of African Americans smoking cigars,
Hmm. Yeah.
the where I'm seeing more and more shops that are more diverse, where you maybe
Hmm.
would have
Yeah.
this is the white cigar shop, or this is the black cigar shop, or this is the
Mm,
Arabic.
Yeah.
This I love seeing the diversity of people because when
Hmm.
you do have community, your community should look like your country. And
Mhm.
when you're able to bring in people that are Latin with African
Mhm.
American, Caucasian, like you just have a mixture of people,
Mhm.
and you realize that we all have different backgrounds, we all have different beliefs, and we all have
Mhm.
these different places, but we all end up in the same place at the cigar lounge. And the truth is, a cigar lounge really is probably one of the most unique places
Mhm.
because you have so many different people, and I want to see that continue. So I think the change would be to see that people would be less judgmental on others, welcoming more different people in, and
Mhm.
really understanding that no matter what cigar you smoke, strong, mild,
Mhm.
medium, light, dark, we all take some kind of joy in this product. But the
Mhm.
reality is, it's really taking joy within the community. And I
Yeah.
Yes.
want to see that continue and continue to
Mhm.
build. And I think we will see that
Mhm.
as we go along. And I think COVID brought a lot of new cigar smokers to
Yeah.
the culture. And
Yep.
I hope
Yeah, it
that
did.
people that enjoy the cigars, we welcome those people in and teach them and bring them into the fold.
Love
Yes.
it. Well, I want to thank you, Miguel, first of all.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. This has been a fantastic journey. I absolutely love
Mhm.
all of the stories through
Mhm.
all of the cigars, and
Mhm.
from a line of cigars that we here at Leaf and Grain Society, through all of our members, absolutely love. I don't know if you saw all the comments, but so many comments of different, from our different viewers smoking different lines from Crown Heads, and so really appreciate you coming out. In the next coming weeks, we've got 6 guests lined up. Thank you to both Cigar Traveler and
Mhm.
Red of just
Mhm.
confirming these bookings. So up into August, we've got 6 guests coming up. Next week, we need a pairing. And so, viewers, if you have a pairing that you want to challenge us with, let Red and I know right away of what that challenge is, so that we can come to it. I am going to ask that everybody stay on as we close this up. So let us
Mhm.
know. Send Red a message. Send myself a message. Post it in our Leaf and Grain group. If you're not following us here on YouTube or you haven't liked our Leaf and Grain Society page, please go out and like it. Go out to our YouTube channel. Go out to our website. Uh, Subscribe to us, click that notification. All of that's going to help us out as we continue growing and continue bringing you great interviews with phenomenal guests and phenomenal pairings and going through the pairings. But until next time, explore the pairings.
There's something for everyone. Good night, y'all.
Thank you. Good night. You guys stay on just for another few moments.